Wednesday, February 13th. This is the afternoon session of the Portland City Council. Carla, please call the roll.
Yes.
Fritz.
Here.
Fish.
Here.
Hardesty.
Here.
Udaly.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or the first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. If it does not, you may be ruled out of order. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you're in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Please remain seated in city and council chambers unless entering or exiting. If you are filming the proceedings, please do not use bright lights or disrupt the meeting. Disruptive conduct such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Very good, thank you. Before we read the item, I just want to give us a little bit of context. In December, I asked for a work session to discuss the city's participation in the Joint Terrorism Task Force. This is an issue that Commissioner Hardesty raised as an issue during her campaign. This is also an issue that's come before the Portland City Council on prior occasions. In collaboration with Commissioner Hardesty's office, we hosted a work session yesterday that was comprised of 2 separate panels. The first panel included community advocates and experts in support of the city's withdrawal from the Joint Terrorism Task Force. The second panel included representatives from the Portland Police Bureau, the FBI, and the United States Attorney's Office. I'd again like to thank all of our panelists for taking the time to share their knowledge with us yesterday and contributing to a robust discussion about civil rights and public safety and what we need from our federal partners in order to make this relationship sustainable. Today, we have before us Commissioner Hardesty's resolution to remove PPB participation from the Joint Terrorism Task Force, otherwise known as the JTTF. Commissioner Fish and I have also submitted an ordinance containing the city-federal MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the terms of the city's participation in the Joint Terrorism Task Force in the event that the council wishes to stay an active member in the JTTF. In summary, what's being presented today for you to testify on are effectively 3 options: whether to withdraw from the JTTF, whether to stay in the JTTF, or whether to find ways to improve the city's involvement in the JTTF. And we would welcome your active engagement on any of those options. You will notice this is not a combined hearing. In other words, we are not going to read both the resolution and the ordinance at the same time, but it would be great if folks testifying today could consider these options as they weigh in. So with this, I'll give Commissioner Hardesty an opening statement. I'll then give Commissioner Fish a brief few minutes for remarks. After that, we will jump right in to the presentations. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, the general public, for being here today. This is an issue that's near and dear to many people's heart. It really gets to the fundamental question in our democracy. How safe are community members from the overreach of their local and federal law enforcement officers? And do we as a community feel safer being part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, or do we believe community safety lies in some other mechanism? I appreciate folks being here today and lots of people wanting to testify. And I'm going to ask once again if people would really be respectful of the body, because I want to make sure we get to a vote today. I do not want any interruptions to prevent us from actually having that vote. I want us on the public record, and I want us to walk out of this room by 5 o'clock being clear about where we stand as it relates to the Joint Tourism Task Force. So thank you all. I really appreciate you being here, and I look forward to what will be a very lively discussion here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Fish.
Mayor Wheeler, Commissioner Hardesty, and colleagues, I just want to reiterate my understanding of what we're doing here procedurally. So the issue that we will be discussing this afternoon is a resolution that Commissioner Hardesty has brought forth, and that resolution will be voted on today, regardless of where we are in the testifying, because we're going to lose a quorum. There will be an opportunity for a vote, and I appreciate that. If the vote is in favor of the resolution, then that has the effect of a withdrawal within, I think, 60 days from the JTTF. If the vote is against the resolution, then there is an ordinance which has been filed, which the council will take up in due course, which memorializes the current memorandum of understanding. I have a number of amendments which I intend to offer. They are not germane to the resolution because the resolution is a thumbs up or thumbs down on current participation. But if the council votes down the resolution for any reason, then I have amendments that I will offer based on the feedback that we've received from the community in terms of how to strengthen the relationship, and specifically some of the outstanding testimony we got yesterday during what I thought was one of the most thoughtful and well-constructed work sessions we've had. But I will not be offering those amendments at this time, Mayor, because my amendments, which deal with requiring observance with state law to be memorialized in the Memorandum of Understanding, more robust annual reports, having the police chief obtain necessary security clearance and other issues, those are not germane to this resolution. It is only if this resolution is voted down that I will seek to amend the ordinance, which is before council, and we'll do it in the ordinary course. And I appreciate the collaborative way the council has structured this hearing.
Thank you, Commissioner Fish. Carla, could you read item 134, please?
Yes. Authorize withdrawal of Portland Police Bureau officers from the Federal Joint Terrorism Task Force and establish protocols for cooperating with the FBI on terrorism investigations on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty.
Excuse me, Mayor. As you know, Kimberly from the ACLU was unable to testify yesterday, and we've invited her to come and give invited testimony. We also have two people who are headed to the airport who did testify yesterday, but I would appreciate your indulgence to allow them to also testify using whatever the normal 2 or 3 minutes that you're going to give to people when Kimberly has completed her turn.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
And then my understanding is that there's going to be a couple of presentations from the mayor's staff with equal time to talk about the report and show the Chief Outlaw's video. Is that what's going to happen?
So that was the plan this morning, but it is my understanding that council office has changed that. Michelle, could you give me clarification on that, please? Please state your name for the record. Where are the council offices on that request?
Michelle Planback, Legislative Director to Mayor Wheeler. At this time, on this resolution, Commissioner Hardesty has some invited testimony. Once the resolution has been considered by council, then we take up the ordinance, and at that time, we would have time for invited testimony and presentations.
So my understanding was we were going to have a little bit of equal time as a predicate for this hearing just to set the stage. Is that no longer the proposal?
That was no longer the plan, but if council wishes, of course, Tracy Reeve is here as.
Well, can I just be clear on the record? I want to get to testimony as quickly as possible.
Yes,
But
as
I
do
do
I.
think if we're extending the courtesy of having 3 people testify in favor, it does seem to me normal course of how we do hearings, that if there's a couple of people that want to set the stage in the context for another view,
Yes.
we ought to make time for that.
I would
Yes.
support that, so I'd recommend we tee up
Great.
the testimony from Chief Outlaw, and I would also recommend we have AC Resch present to give an overview of the 2019 JTTF report.
Great, they are both here.
Thank you.
And I'm assuming it's going to be within the same 10 minutes that we're giving for the other invited testimony. Is that correct, Mayor?
Is that how long your testimony is going to take?
Yes, the 10 minutes that we've given Kimberly, we did not want to extend this. This is
Perfect.
really for the public to
Good.
talk.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's my concern as well, because really, folks, we have to call the question at about 4:30, and I want to give as much time for public testimony as possible. So if you could orchestrate that.
Yep.
They will collectively have 10 minutes. My recollection is the chief's presentation is about 6 of
It
that
is.
10.
My recommendation would be to move forward first with the testimony from the folks from out of town and Kimberly McCullough.
Very good.
Thanks.
Go for it. Thank you.
Thank you. And so if we could have Kimberly from the ACLU come up, please. And also, yes, please, our other guests who have to get to the airport. Thank you. And please introduce yourself for the record. Kimberly, feel free to start.
Great, thank you. I was going to say Mayor Wheeler, but he's over there. Mayor Wheeler, members of the commission. My name is Kimberly McCullough. I'm here on behalf of the ACLU of Oregon, and I am here once again on behalf of our organization asking you to withdraw the City of Portland from its membership in the JTTF. You have heard from the ACLU and from myself on this issue many times. So rather than repeating my prior testimony, I want to focus on exactly what we're asking you to do. First of all, we're asking you to listen as elected officials to the many community groups that are asking you to hear their concerns about this city's police officers working for an entity that we do not trust. Second, we are asking you to engage in a moral and ethical quandary. Mike German, who's sitting next to me here and who you heard from yesterday, is actually a very good example of someone who is faced with the complicated decision of whether or not to continue a deep relationship with an entity that regularly engages in civil rights violations. Mr. German was motivated to join the FBI out of a desire to protect and serve, much like I believe that our local police chief and members of the Portland Police Bureau are motivated by a desire to keep us safe. But in all things that we do, we have to ask ourselves the question of whether or not the tools that we use to keep ourselves safe are in fact causing different types of harm. And if we are causing harm in the name of keeping ourselves safe, I would hope that, like Mr. German, we would change our ways. It is this type of introspection and action that the ACLU here in Oregon and across the country wishes that the FBI and ICE would engage in. But their track record, unfortunately, does not reflect a commitment to protecting us from violations of our civil rights, and instead demonstrates repeated targeting of religious groups and political activists by the FBI and horrific practices of family separation in our immigrant communities by ICE. To be clear, the FBI and ICE have a demonstrated history right up until the present day of dragnet surveillance and profiling. I want to lift up just a few examples. Recently in California, the FBI investigated civil rights groups as a terrorism threat and viewed the KKK as victims. Not long ago, the FBI also targeted Black Lives Matter by sending out notices to law enforcement across the country about Black identity extremists being a domestic terrorist threat. A domestic terrorism briefing the FBI gave to law enforcement agencies in 2017 warned them of the threat of pro-abortion extremists, which there's no evidence exists. In fact, the opposite does. And recent admissions here that if the JTTF lacks evidence of prosecutable criminal activity for a JTTF suspect, that they have an admission that they have engaged in immigration enforcement against those individuals. So like Mike German, this city faces a moral quandary. Do we sacrifice our rights in the name of safety? Or do we instead commit ourselves to the values of this city and the state of Oregon, which have been memorialized many times in our state and local sanctuary laws, our anti-profiling laws, and our very unique laws that prohibit collection of information about people based on their religious and social views? To be clear, we are not asking that the city sit idly by if there is a true threat to our communities. Before the JTTF existed, and during the time that the city was not a member of the JTTF, and while the city collaborated with the JTTF on a case-by-case basis, nothing prohibited the FBI and the city of Portland from sharing information about actual threats to our communities, and nothing will prohibit that type of information sharing if we pass this ordinance. What will be prohibited is 2 of our local officers working directly for an entity that does not respect or follow local and state laws that protect our communities from targeting and civil rights violations. It has been suggested that all of this can be addressed by reporting and security clearances. And although we do appreciate the attempt to build in sideboards, we are unconvinced that this will address our concerns. For a number of years, our past collaborations with the JTTF, annual reports were promised to this body and to the public, but even calling them reports is somewhat misleading. What we got was threadbare and totally insufficient. We simply do not trust that anything will be different this time around. Trust is crucial here. We've been asked why we don't trust the FBI, and we've been told that past examples of rights violations here in Portland should not bother us. We've been told that current and past examples of rights violations from different jurisdictions interacting with these same federal agencies also shouldn't bother us. We've been told, trust us despite those things. And we've been told that unless we can lift up the veil of secrecy that currently covers the JTTF here in Portland and point to violations of rights happening this very minute, that we should just have faith that everything is okay. But we don't have trust, and it's for very good reason. And it will continue to be this way until the FBI, ICE, and those in high positions of power in our federal government engage in the type of introspection and moral quandary we're asking you to engage in today. We are asking you to listen to us, to listen to representatives of community groups that advocate for civil rights and civil liberties, groups that advocate for immigrant communities, religious minorities, political activists, people of color, and all people who have been targeted unfairly by the FBI and ICE. Please hear us. Please understand, yes, we want to be safe, but safety to our communities is not just safety from terrorist threats. It is also safety from the violation of our rights and the targeting of our communities by the FBI and ICE. Thank you.
Commissioner Hardesty, could I ask a question? I know that at least 2 of your panelists have planes to catch, and we thank you for being here. Kimberly, are you sticking around for the remaining? Because I might have some
Yeah,
follow-up later.
absolutely.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that.
Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners, thank you again for inviting me both yesterday and again today. My name is Mike German. I'm with the Brennan Center, but I'm testifying in favor of the withdrawal from the Joint Terrorism Task Force in my personal capacity. I appreciate the leadership that the City Council has shown on this issue nationally, and that I've been able to participate in it. I don't have much to add to what we discussed yesterday, but I do want to address one issue which I think is a bit misleading, because it seems like we're presented with a question of whether to stay in the Joint Terrorism Task Force and that will somehow improve our security, or withdraw and that will somehow risk our security. When you have to keep in mind that local law enforcement was in the Joint Terrorism Task Force in Boston before the Boston Marathon bombing. They were in the Joint Terrorism Task Force in Pittsburgh before the synagogue shooting. The Department of Defense was in the Joint Terrorism Task Force before the Fort Hood shooting. These were all instances and more where what happened has more to do with the flood of information coming in through these unregulated systems that don't use a reasonable standard. And so in Boston, for example, the FBI was warned that Tamerlan Tsarnaev presented a threat and did a 90-day assessment. It turned out that that was one assessment of 1,000 assessments they had done that year. So they're doing so much work that the important details were lost. And the Boston police chief later testified that he was unaware of the warning that the FBI had received and would have done things differently had he known that information. So I wish I could promise you complete secrecy. Obviously, I can't do that, but neither can the Joint Terrorism Task Force do that by saying that if you stay in, you will be 100% safe. So this is really about making reasonable decisions to make sure that we're protecting all our interests, as Kimberly suggested. So thanks you again for inviting me.
Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, thank you again for convening this conversation and for considering this important vote. My name is Zahra Billu. I am the Executive Director of the San Francisco Bay Area Office of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. We are the nation's largest American Muslim civil rights organization. A number of years ago, we looked at Portland as we were doing work in San Francisco after facing years and years of abuse by FBI agents targeting members of the Muslim community, showing up at their mosques, their homes, and their workplaces, sometimes targeting minors at schools to ask them questions about religion and politics, things that we hold dear as protected by the First Amendment, and so often doing it with the cooperation and support of San Francisco police officers. We looked at that time to Portland to say, this city is safe, it protects its community's civil rights, and it's doing so in a way that provides leadership for the rest of us. And after a number of years of navigating promises from the FBI and the JTTF officers that they would report, that they would provide transparency, that they would follow local law, we were left with no choice but to withdraw from the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Because as has been noted, the reports weren't even reports. They were laughable at best, if they were on time, if they were produced, if they had any information that we could use. I appreciate the optimism that we might get better reports in Portland, but you led the way once before. I ask you to lead the way again. Yesterday, I sat here and heard on the record representatives of the U.S. Attorney's Office saying that they disregard Oregon state law, that they are not obligated to follow it. I heard the special agent in charge of the FBI say on the record that he did not know that there was a reporting requirement. Why would anything change? We look to you for leadership then, we look to you for leadership again. I urge you, on behalf of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, on behalf of so many minority communities over and over again targeted by what is a federal agency giving us security theater and manufacturing terrorist threats, to move forward, to withdraw from the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, that concludes my invited testimony.
Very good. So with that, then, we have Chief Outlaw's video, is that correct? It's teed up, ready to go, Mustafa? And then we'll have AC Resh. Carla, how much time was the first panel?
Sorry, I stopped the clock. They were just over 10 minutes, almost.
Very good, thank you.
12.
Wheeler and the City Commissioners for allowing me to provide remarks via video today. As you watch this, I will be in Washington, D.C. at the Major Cities Chiefs Conference talking to other chiefs and sheriffs from all over the country and Canada about the challenges they face and the creative strategies they are implementing in their communities. Specifically, I will be introducing the topic of white nationalism, crowd management, and an increase in violence and public disruption in demonstrations. Effective partnerships between law enforcement agencies to reduce or prevent criminal activity is a key component of contemporary policing. Our partnership with the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force is one of those relationships that keeps our community safe. As Chief of Police, I fully support our continued participation in the JTTF. I believe that removing Portland police officers from the JTTF is a disservice to our community and not in the best interest of our city's public safety. We need to remain a fully committed partner in the JTTF. Countering violent extremism in all forms requires partnerships and cooperation across jurisdictional lines. If a majority of the City Council votes to leave the JTTF, the Portland Police Bureau will still work to investigate reports of terrorism activity and violent extremism reported to the Portland Police. However, we may be walled off from the day-to-day information from other agencies that is vital to protecting our community. The Portland Police Bureau remains the largest law enforcement agency in the state of Oregon. We have resources, personnel, and expertise that may prove invaluable in the investigation and prosecution of individuals or organizations intent on causing our community harm. We want to be on the front end of these investigations. This can allow us to reach out with our behavioral health unit, our family services division, our youth services division, or other connections and services we have to resolve an issue before a plan to commit an act of mass violence becomes a reality. Portland Police Bureau members are out every day in our community. We know our city, and we have developed positive relationships with many people who can help guide us and influence the investigative processes of our federal law enforcement partners. Questions continue to be raised about privacy rights and public safety as law enforcement conducts investigations with federal agencies. While I understand those concerns, there are strong legal and policy oversight measures in place to ensure we can continue our participation in the JTTF without compromising our laws or policies. As law enforcement officers and as a community, we need to be vigilant about these issues, but we also need to be vigilant about real threats and the fact that there are people intent on harming our community. I appreciate this opportunity to provide testimony today. While I am available by phone during this session, it is my wish that if you have questions, you can hear directly from the subject matter experts and the people that are actually doing the work. Thank you for providing a respectful process in which all stakeholders and the community can voice their opinions.
Very good. And we have AC Assistant Chief Jamie Rush is here as well. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me back again. This is on today. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Jamie Rush, Assistant Chief of Investigations for the Portland Police Bureau. I hope you had time to review the report that was given yesterday. I believe it clarifies a couple of the points, and I would like to add a little bit more. Clearance was mentioned several times yesterday in regards to the mayor. What I want to be clear to everyone is that if there is an
One sec,
instance...
Mayor.
Excuse me, are the captions playing? We're back.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Clearance was mentioned several times yesterday in regards to the mayor. What I want to be clear is if there's ever an instance in which the mayor needs information, there is a process in place to provide a non-disclosure agreement, and the information can and will be provided. Training was questioned yesterday. The city attorney's office has provided the required annual JTTF training for the officers. It began in 2015 and has continued, not only by the legal update training provided in the required annual in-service all officers attend, but also when the city attorney meets annually with CIU officers to provide legal update and training specifically to the JTT officers and answer any questions. Most importantly, ICE was mentioned yesterday, and I want it to be clear that there are two branches of ICE. The ERO, which is the Enforcement and Removal Operations, which enforces immigration laws and is not a member of the JTTF. And HSI, the Homeland Security Investigations, which is a member of the JTTF and is responsible for the enforcement of laws that threaten national security. Again, the enforcement and removal operations of ICE are not a member of the JTTF, and I think it is important to distinguish this. This report breaks down the number and types of cases handled by the PPB officers, and again, illustrates the oversight, ORS, and directives that the officers are required to follow. If this report does not provide the information that you were looking for, the Portland Police Bureau, and I can confidently speak for my FBI and U.S. Attorney partners, would be happy to meet with you to discuss what it is you are looking for and what you would like the report to look like. Lastly, as I sat in the work group yesterday, I heard a universal theme from all of the presenters on each side, the mayor and each commissioner. That universal theme was that we all want is what's best for our community and what is best for Portland. In fact, many yesterday highlighted either being born and raised in Portland or having spent the majority of their lives here. Both sides acknowledged that there have been failures in past investigations and the desire for safety. Portland has never shied away from being different, from standing alone, or being the first.
What I offer for you is a Portland Police Bureau and partners who are willing to co-create a JTTF that this council is comfortable with and does feel as the safest option for the Portland Police, or for the city of Portland. I do not believe Portland should walk away, but rather again be the first and lead the nation in how this work should be done correctly.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Very good. And are you sticking around, or?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Then people might have questions for you later as well.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so there we have it. With that, Carla, how many people do we have signed up?
We have 36.
36. Let's do this. Let's try and get it in 2 minutes. Let's be as quick as possible. And that will give us plenty of time as a council to consider what you've said and deliberate. Please call the first 3 people.
Do you want to?
Oh, yeah, and if there are people with small children, and I heard at least one little child here, and if there are people with special needs or disabilities, please let Carla know, and we'll move you up to the front of the list. Thank you.
So, we'll go with Mr. Walsh, and then we'll also take Brandon Mayfield and Casey Jama. And then after them, and I'll be calling the next 3, because I believe we have people in the overflow rooms. Yes, we do. Okay, thanks. So after this first panel, then it'll be Millie Hobash, Jim Kennedy, and Rabbi Ariel Stone.
And you said 36, Carla, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Walsh. I represent Individuals for Justice. I would ask a little patience. I'm losing my voice. Some people are celebrating that.
Not us.
There are a number of people who could not be here today because of the timing or because of their personal experiences. Eileen sends the message to get out of the JTTF, and she writes, "Please use my name. I am a 62-year-old stage 4 cancer patient living in a nursing home, previously houseless." She wanted me to say she is against this. Dr.
I'm sorry, Joe.
Catherine
Excuse me,
Kendall.
Mr. Walsh. She's against what?
Pardon?
I'm sorry, you said that she wanted you to share that she was against this. I want to know what the
She
this
was
is.
against us being in the JTTF.
Thank you.
The way you have this arranged, there's going to be a lot of confusion on who is saying what. So, and we are against being in the JTTF. We want you out. These are people that have contacted me that couldn't be here, that wanted their names at least written in the record, and I'll probably not do a great job. Some of them I don't know, so I'm only going to use their first names. Ruth, I see many potential abuses with the JTTF, but no advantages. Please get out. Amy, thank you for your passion, Joe. Please tell them, get out of JTTF. Kathy, please use my name, and thank you for doing this. Kurt, you can use my name, and please tell them to get out. Individuals for Justice is an organization that's been around for a while. It's very informal, and we take positions on things, and we want you out, please. There's no going back from this. If you stay in the JTTF, we will remember. There's no going back, no apologies. Thank you for your patience, and I promised Patty that I would behave myself today. That should be good news for all of you.
Next 3, please.
Okay, Casey, you want to come up with Millie, Casey, Millie, and Brandon?
And folks, just a reminder, thumbs up if you like what you're hearing, thumbs down if you don't. We just find the applause slows the process down. We want as many people to be able to testify
And after them will
as
be
possible.
Jim Kennedy, Rabbi Ariel Stone, and Dr. Leroy Haynes Jr.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, member of City Commissioners. My name is Casey Chama. I am the Executive Director of United Oregon, and thank you so much for inviting me yesterday to speak with you. I won't take a lot of time. I just want to highlight a couple of points. I've been in this city for 20 years. I'm a very proud Portlander. I love this city, and I love this community. I think this issue for me boils down to one thing, and one thing that I said yesterday, which is, if we stay in the JTTF, we're sending a message for our Muslim community and people who are activists in the community. That is, your civil liberties it's expendable, it's not matter. If we pull out, we're sending that we're an inclusive city. We want to make sure that we want to protect our community from Trump administration's war machine. That is the real core value for Portlanders that I think we ask you to uphold today. I think all of us, including all of you here, we want what's the best for Portland. And I know you care, even if we disagree where we stand on this issue. I want all of us to remember that we're in this together. We're a community. Our community, and Muslim community particularly, wants to be safe. And we want to be part of this community. No one wants to put a jeopardy in our safety. With that said, I want to also introduce to you Millie Kobash, who is our member of Portland Leadership Program that City of Portland funds. And she's going to tell her history today. So Millie, please.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your audience. As was noted, my name is Millie Hobesh, and I am a participant in Unite Oregon's pilot program. I am the daughter of a Yemeni immigrant who moved to Portland in 1991, and I am also a first-hand witness to the effects of the JTTF. My family's home was raided when I was 10 years old. After several years of very heavy surveillance, my father was detained on charges that he was not allowed to know for the first portion of the trial. He was kept away from our family for a year and a half. The charges were found to be false. My parents' attorneys were told by the prosecuting attorney that the charges had been invented wholly to strike fear into the community and weaken bonds between individual members of the community. The judge ultimately dismissed the charges with prejudice, meaning that they were unsubstantiated and cannot be brought up again. However, by that time, the raid had already destroyed my family. My father was left chronically underemployed and unable to find skilled labor. My mother is permanently traumatized. I left school at age 10 and did not return again until I completed my high school diploma at PCC many years later. My young siblings were left fatherless during this time, and family and friends completely distanced themselves from us out of fear, isolating us. My family is hardly the only one. Other families in our community had their homes raided multiple times, family members detained, were forced to leave Oregon, or were offered money and safety in exchange for providing false testimony. This story has played out many, many times within my community to many people that I know. It has sowed a complete distrust between the Muslim community and the city of Portland. And so with that, I urge that you guys vote against remaining in the JTTF.
Thank you.
Thank you for your courage in coming today. I appreciate that.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners, for this opportunity to be with you again on this distinguished panel to bring up this important issue, whether or not to get out of the JTTF. This is my third go-around, and I want to thank everyone here who supports getting out of the JTTF. And as you can see, we have a very large contingent, so much so that every time in the past has even risen to the rafters, as you can see. First of all, the function of the city police, federal investigators, and ICE are not the same. They investigate federal crimes, and ICE Their job is to enforce immigration laws to detect and deport illegal aliens. The JTTF engages in surveillance and electronic monitoring without probable cause and the use of informants in interviews and in sting operations that entrap people and, as you've heard from the testimony, affect people's lives in very long-lasting, meaningful ways. The local police don't do this. This is a violation of our Fourth Amendment protections and the Oregon Constitution and state laws, which includes our sanctuary laws that prevent any law enforcement official to collect or keep, or I'm sorry, it states no law enforcement agency or subdivision shall use personnel for detecting or apprehending immigrants whose only violation are of federal immigration laws. The FBI reported just 2 months ago, when asked if the JTTF participated in immigration-related arrests, said, "We will use immigration violations as appropriate to disrupt subjects who pose a threat to our communities." They said, "We take terrorism subjects off the street using every tool we have." And in meeting with the mayor's office just recently, it was reported that when they were asked how many arrests are made, they said 200 arrests are made under the JTTF, 25 of which were immigration-related, 25 arrests immigration-related. It wasn't clear if that was national or local, but it just shows where their priorities lie. So in closing, I just want to say that you can't say you're prepared to take a stand to protect our city and state immigrants and ethnic and religious minorities, and at the same time offer city and state resources to federal programs like the JTTF that targets them and works with ICE. Thank you.
Thank you. Next three, please, Carl.
Are Jim Kennedy, Rabbi Ariel Stone, and Dr. Leroy Haynes Jr., and they'll be followed by Amanda Aguilar-Shank, Eric Villa, and Simab Husseini.
Good afternoon. Welcome. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Jim Kennedy. I'm here on behalf of the Portland JACL. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about our concerns about the Joint Terrorism Task Force participation. There's been a lot of information shared recently examining all the safeguards and efforts put into place by the JTTF participants and overseers to ensure local officers are not violating state law and that Oregonian civil rights are not impacted. The efforts are commendable, and I believe the people in place are righteous. But ultimately, the oversight process amounts to self-regulation that occurs in secret. At Portland JACL, we understand that civil rights become secondary when people are afraid. Most of us feel comfortable that our civil rights are safe, but everybody fears physical harm. Policies that make us safer are always better until our civil rights are impacted. The incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II was considered prudent policy that kept us safer. And yes, that was a long time ago, and it was a great abuse. However, it was revealed to be bad policy through the history of time. And just recently, Chief Justice Roberts wrote that Korematsu versus the U.S., which essentially says that safety takes precedent over civil rights during times of military necessity, was gravely wrong the day it was decided and has been overruled in the court of history. We are not trying to equate mass incarceration with the JTTF, but our history tells us that well-meaning enforcement agencies that protect us from physical harm are also the ones that can infringe on our civil liberties. Trust but verification is the minimum requirement. And if we cannot transform the JTTF to operate in a transparent fashion, then we should stop cooperating. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome.
Yes. To our distinguished Mayor Ted Wheeler and illustrious commissioners of the Portland City Council, I'm the Reverend Dr. Leroy Haynes Jr., chairperson of the Albina Minister Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform. I come before the City Council as a longtime civil rights leader who marched with Dr. Martin Luther King and served as a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. I have seen and experienced how law enforcement agencies like the FBI, the Sheriff Department, and local police have abused and misused their authority to stop the progress to expand the democratic process, to include blacks, communities of colors, other oppressed groups under the banner of law and order and American patriotism. The foot soldiers of the civil rights movement and post-civil rights movement have seen how these various groups have been used to block civil rights, to block voting rights, to block basic constitutional rights of citizens of our country. The vicious attack by J. Edgar Hoover, whose spirit continued to be in the FBI, and the FBI to destroy completely the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and other black leaders, as well as the civil rights movement, shall never be forgotten. The abuse of civil rights and constitutional rights by the FBI COINTEL program should never be forgotten. History has taught us very clearly that when law enforcement become politicized, as was the case with the FBI and other agencies, the constitutional rights of citizens and non-citizens will be violated. And although there are individuals within the FBI and other agencies with great character and integrity and commitment, the constitutional rights, they are no match to the politicalization of what we see today and witnessing with our own eyes, the corruption that is taking place. This is why AMAC opposes the city joining the Joint Terrorist Task Force. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mayor Wheeler, members of the City Council. My name is Rabbi Ariel Stone. I speak as a leader of the Portland Interfaith Clergy Resistance and as a rabbi representing Portland Jews who oppose our sanctuary city's participation with the FBI in the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Our reasoning is deeply rooted in prophetic ethics in which Judaism and Christianity share our sense of social justice. Out of the ethical imperative to treat the homeless wanderer and the refugee equally with the homeborn, we reject the federal government's persecution of those immigrants who are our neighbors living in our midst. Out of the ethical imperative that justice requires truth, we reject the assertion that the Joint Task Force work can only be done in secrecy from you, or that Portland police should have discretion to engage in deception in the course of their work. And out of the ethical imperative to treat others as we ourselves wish to be treated, we believe and support those who among us testify to their persecution. We stand with those who are targeted and whose right to due process and to be considered innocent until proven guilty has been violated. Jewish legal tradition warns against putting a stumbling block before the blind, allowing the FBI to function in Portland in secrecy when we know that their standards for respecting the human rights of our residents differ harmfully from Portland's own, puts a stumbling block before you in your duty to serve those whom you represent, and before the Portland police in their duty to protect and serve. Not every FBI action is wrong, but our city's cumulative experience with the task force does not meet the social ethics that our city's residents have repeatedly affirmed. In order to minimize the risk to civil and human rights violations against the people of Portland, we need transparency. We expect full participation and oversight from those who represent us. Ending our participation in the task force does not mean that we expect Portland to no longer cooperate with the FBI when circumstances warrant. It does make an important assertion that you are committed to protecting all those who share our home. We cannot seek our society's safety at the expense of the most vulnerable among us. The Joint Terrorism Task Force is a source of terror for our innocent Portland neighbors, and we object to aiding and abetting its unethical and unholy activity.
So just a quick reminder before Carla, I'm being somewhat lax on the time here, but I want to be very, very clear. If you hold yourself to 2 minutes, that increases the likelihood that other people at the end of the list will actually get to give testimony.
The next three are Amanda Aguilar-Shank, Eric Villa, and Simab Husseini, and they'll be followed by Joel Bienin, Pastor Ed Mundane, and Jai Singh.
No, it's no fun. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Eric Vega. I am representing the Portland Immigrant Rights Coalition and Immigrant Rights Organization. The record of this federal administration is unclean and flies a false flag. It makes claims of we're just going to go after the bad guys, but in fact, and I think if you reflect upon this, you can see that the Trump administration is anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim. And this perspective seeps into everything. It taints claims to neutrality. It taints claims to fairness. It taints claims to justice. We have an immigrant rights hotline, and we are in communication with people across the country. And what we hear over and over and over again is people, families, who are concerned about their children, who are concerned about their jobs, who are concerned about cooperation between local law enforcement and federal agencies. They don't go to the store, they don't go to the doctor, they don't take their kids to school because they live in fear. And this is the result of this administration. They say, those immigrants that we talk to, that we do not want to be collateral damage. And we say that because it flows from our experience in the world. We believe that this administration's record is clear. It can't be trusted, and you should send a clear message. When the Muslim ban was being put forward, people in Portland and all around the country went to the airports and they protested. When the children were being separated from their families, people everywhere in the country got together and they protested. They bent the curve and the direction of this administration. You have a voice, you have a choice. Please withdraw.
Good afternoon.
Hi, City Commissioners. Thank you for having me here today. That was a very powerful testimony just from Eric Vega. And I'm here my name is Amanda Aguilar-Shank. I represent Freedom to Thrive, formerly known as Enlace. I'm also a mother and a second-generation immigrant living here in Portland. I'm here to urge you to vote to withdraw from the Joint Terrorism Task Force for a lot of the reasons that have been brought today. We know the Trump administration has been actively hostile towards sanctuary states, municipalities. We know they've doubled down on apprehension of Portland residents who are immigrants, surveillance of Black communities. We know the FBI has a history in Portland of targeting youth, people of color, particularly Muslims, Black community, immigrants. And I think it's enough evidence for me to hear the story of Millie, who just sat in this chair a moment ago. It's enough to hear the story of Muhammad back in 2010. I know that, I've heard these stories, you all have heard these stories of young people, our most marginalized, people who need the most support to thrive in this community, who are being actively terrorized, criminalized by the JTTF and by the city's participation in the JTTF. I also wanted to let you know that my last couple of seconds, I was in the overflow room across the hall. It's completely full. It's 100% full. It's standing room only. I asked in there if anybody supported staying in the JTTF, and nobody does. Every person to the person in that room supports getting out. And so I urge you to follow the lead of San Francisco, many municipalities that will follow and withdraw from the JTTF.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, Commission. Yeah, thanks for having us all here today. And when I say all, I hope that it's a bunch of people that you guys will be able to hear and understand that we're here in force. It's all of us. And as she just mentioned, that it's support to withdraw from JTTF. I sit with our community as my blessed job allows me to. As a community member with Unite Oregon and community organizer, my name is Simab Husseini. You guys heard from my executive director, Casey Jama, yesterday and today. I sit with our affected community members. I sat with you all yesterday in our work session. I've listened to the reasons to remain in JTTF. We heard from our U.S. State Attorney, Billy Williams, loath to acknowledge our 30 years of sanctuary status as a state. So I'm here to tell you that in my position, who do I trust? My position is a smaller representation of yours. I sit in the community and I listen to them, and I advocate for my community. But we're here today. We've come with our communities. We would bring all of them, but you don't have enough overflow for us.
That's right.
So please vote with open honesty after listening to us again today. No amendments, ordinances can fix what's wrong. There's no walling off, as I repeatedly hear. Separate powers allow for meaningful exchange. Vote to withdraw the Joint Terrorism Task Force from Portland Police Bureau. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Next three, please, Carla.
Are Joel Bienin, Pastor Ed Mundane, and Jai Singh, and they'll be followed by Debbie Iona, Harvey Thorstad, and Maxine Fuchsen.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Go ahead and start.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Joel Bienin. I'm the Donald J. McLaughlin Professor of History Emeritus at Stanford University, and I'm speaking on behalf of Jewish Voice for Peace, one of 47 community organizations urging the City Council to withdraw from the Joint Terrorism Task Force and cancel its memorandum of agreement with the FBI. The FBI and ICE are the biggest players in the JTTF. They regularly engage in profiling and surveillance that is prohibited under Oregon law. The FBI has a long history of targeting and profiling political dissidents and others based on race, ethnicity, nationality, and religion. Its counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, which operated from 1956 to 1971, targeted Martin Luther King Jr. and other African-American leaders of the civil rights and black freedom struggles, anti-Vietnam War organizers, feminists, and American Indian movement. These practices continue today and have particularly affected Arabs and Muslims and other immigrants. The FBI's actions in this respect are entirely consistent with the policies of President Trump, who has made clear his intention to continue targeting people based on their religion and country of origin. Participation in the JTTF violates Portland's status as a sanctuary city. ICE participates in the JTTF, meaning that Portland cooperates with ICE. Portland cannot remain a sanctuary city in good faith if it maintains formal ties with ICE. A Portland FBI spokesperson openly admitted that the JTTF uses ICE data in its investigations to deport people on the basis of suspicion alone rather than probable cause. This violates the city's pledge not to cooperate with ICE, as well as violating Oregon law, which prohibits law enforcement agencies from collecting or maintaining information about the political, religious, or social views or activities of any individual or group, unless such information directly relates to an investigation or of a criminal activity. Some Jewish organizations have argued that participating in the JTTF will enhance the security of Portland's Jewish community. Recent experience shows that this is unlikely.
Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up.
In recent years, by far the biggest threats to the security of American Jews have come from white nationalist organizations and individuals who have been unleashed by the election of President Trump. Neither in Charlottesville, Virginia, nor in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, did the city's participation in the JTTF
thank you. We
prevent
appreciate it.
attacks on the Jewish community.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, dear Mayor Wheeler and commissioners. My name is Jay Singh. I'm a field organizer with the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, APANO. The FBI doesn't have prohibitions on surveillance, and we also know that they regularly target members of our community based on religious or political activities and perceived immigration status. The communities that I work with as a field organizer for the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, APANO, includes the South Asian immigrant community, as well as those that practice the Sikh faith. There has been increased targeting and discrimination of our communities, as we have seen with the detention of over 70 South Asian Punjabi Sikh individuals in Oregon's only medium security prison in Sheridan, Oregon, this past year, because of the federal government zero tolerance policy. The JTTF is an extension of Trump's deportation force. On behalf of APANO, we urge Portland to stay true to its values and protect our rights by withdrawing from the JTTF. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm E.D. Mondine, president of the NAACP. To our mayor and to our president, Udeli, and to our esteemed commission. Martin Luther King made it very clear, and this quote became adage, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. The NAACP has had a long history of dealing with the unscrupulous practices of the FBI and other agencies fashioned to keep surveillance on what is thought to be a threat to our great nation, America, and its citizens. The ability of the PBB to help facilitate civil and human rights became a threat when we see a continued partnership with the Joint Terrorist Task Force as it relates to PPB. Recently, our city watched in horror as we assisted in the furtherance of bigotry as the PBB intervened in an illegal eviction of a paying guest at a local hotel. When it is ambiguous at best as to the role that the PBB plays with the JTTF, it becomes a bit problematic. It concerns me when our police commissioner and police chief are only informed about what work the JTTF officers are involved in if those officers of the FBI decide and what is on a needs-to-know basis. The Joint Terrorism Task Force, when we look at our state's sanctuary law, which prohibits local and state law enforcement agencies from expending its resources from enforcing federal immigration laws. The ability to exercise civil and human rights becomes a threat when we see the continued partnership with the PBB. I am continually at awe that our time and resources are not better spent dealing with white nationalists and a barrage of other white ring extremist groups. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next three are Debbie Iona, Harvey Thorstad, and Maxine Fuchsen, and they'll be followed by A.J. Mendoza, Sandy Polishuk, and Olivia Catby Smith.
Did we lose a shoe?
Anybody see a shoe?
Did she lose a shoe?
She must have had to tie her boots now, mine just.
Oh,
a
no,
shoe.
the whole Sorry, you got upstaged by a very cute kid. Good afternoon.
That's
Go ahead.
irresistible, I understand. Mayor, Commissioners, I'm Debbie Iona, representing the League of Women Voters of Portland. Over its 99-year history, the League has developed a set of fundamental principles upon which we act. Two of those principles relate to the city's participation in the FBI's JTTF. The League promotes an open governmental system that is representative, accountable, and responsive, and that protects individual liberties established by the Constitution. Furthermore, it promotes political responsibility through informed and active participation in government. The League first testified on this issue in 2001 and again urges Council to withdraw from the JTTF. We value the protections afforded by Oregon law to individuals engaging in political and other non-criminal First Amendment activities. Portland residents have no guarantee that our local officers assigned to the JTTF are honoring those protections due to FBI restrictions on access to information. A December 2018 Guardian article underscores the community's concern about FBI actions. The article revealed that the FBI created files on climate change activists in the Midwest. These files are part of a larger effort to assess the work of 350.org. The League believes that our democracy is strengthened and sustained by active participation in government. That involvement is threatened when individuals feel they have to look over their shoulders because they fear they are targets of government surveillance and file keeping. We urge you to withdraw and instead work together on legitimate law enforcement investigations on a case-by-case basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. Thank you for looking into this JTTF issue. I'm Harvey Thorstead. I represent Veterans for Peace. We strongly advocate withdrawing from the JTTF. We're composed of about over 100 chapters, international, including a few chapters in Ireland, Britain, Okinawa, Mexico, Japan. We've been opposed to the JTTF move since its inception. It's part of the federal policy of the war on terror. And internationally, we've seen the war on terror in Iraq, a good part, cities in rubble, thanks to our great efforts. Libya, again, a country in chaos, cities in rubble. Happening in Syria, somewhat in Afghanistan, and now, to some extent, looking at Venezuela. The JTTF is basically a secret organization. It separates, it makes the cohesion between the police force and the community, it's divisive. It brings them apart rather than closer. Even in some of our own groups, like our own chapters and our peace movement, somebody comes up with an odd thought. Well, gee, are you a JTTF spy trying to lead us into something to discredit us or something like that? The JTTF is divisive. I strongly oppose getting out of it.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler and City Council members. My name is Maxine Fuchsen, and I speak as a nurse practitioner representing Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. Our organization urges you to withdraw from the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Oregon PSR is an organization of health professionals and public health advocates concerned about threats to human health from war and social inequities. From our perspective, our city's involvement in the JTTF is of grave concern, as we see no evidence that the collaboration protects either the community's safety or its health. The American Public Health Association issued a statement last year declaring that police violence is a public health issue that disproportionately impacts communities of color, people with disabilities and mental illnesses, people living in poverty, people experiencing homelessness, immigrant communities, and LGBTQ communities. In short, how we police our communities has a direct impact on the public's health. So considering both effectiveness and equity, we dig ourselves in even deeper in our relationship with the JTTF. There is repeated evidence that the FBI and ICE disproportionately target communities based on national origin, race, religion, political beliefs, and sexual and gender preference. The health connections are real and direct. This is not some distant correlation. The Century Foundation found direct negative impacts as a result of fear that comes from surveillance, targeting, and profiling. The heaviest impact is felt on communities already at a health disadvantage. Fear, of course, correlates with stress and is a potent trigger of trauma and chronic disease. It's known that when communities live in fear and distrust, they are also under-accessing the needed health, educational, and social services. As advocates for community health and safety, Oregon PSR believes that policing should be based on fairness, community involvement, cultural competency, and restorative practices. Please leave the GTTF.
Next three, please, Carla.
We're going to go with Fendi, Germany, and then we'll go with AJ Mendoza, Sandy Polishuk, and they'll be followed by Olivia Catby-Smith, Emery Mort, and Malcolm Shattuck.
Would you like to go ahead and start? You've got your
Yes.
hands full.
Hello, I'm Fendi, Germany. Good afternoon. I'm not going to take up too much of your time. I do just want to acknowledge that I believe that the JTTF, regardless of how the language is written, I think we should get to a point in America where we see that racism and discrimination exists, right? And regardless of how this is written, we know that people of color are going to be discriminated against and targeted at a much more higher rate. It was nice to see that the police officers came up here and talked about their training and the things that they're receiving, but we also know that their trainings aren't always effective and they continue to receive training because they're not always following through. So we ask you to withdraw, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Mayor, Council. My name is AJ Mendoza. I am organizer at Portland Jobs with Justice. We are a coalition of over 100 unions, faith communities, student organizations. We take action around workers' rights and economic justice. We urge the city's withdrawal from the JTTF, and I think there's an outflow for me from the labor movement at its best, and that is when we understand that an injury to one is an injury to all. And thinking about what to say last night, the enormity of this situation and not wanting to repeat what's been said, I was reminded of something one of our good mentors taught me, which is good leaders need to be ready to make decisions, but great leaders will always reserve the right to grow in their understanding and make a different choice. So I think there was some obfuscation or some obscuring of things that should be made plain. This creates a situation where communities of color, where members of our community who are Muslim are going to be experiencing discrimination. We've heard it. It makes my stomach, like the pit of my stomach, fall out to hear how seriously someone's life was affected by this. And that alone, if that can happen even once, then we have no business being a part of this. And we can change that. If sanctuary means anything, it has to mean that this cannot continue. Yeah, I read the op-ed, and I think I draw a different conclusion about who's a part of my community that I need to protect and whose safety concerns me.
Thank you. Commissioner Hardesty.
I just want to say I know how nervous you are, and you did an incredible job. Thank you so much for being here.
I love you, AJ.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Mayor Wheeler and commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Sandy Polishuk, speaking as a representative of 350 PDX, which has partnered with the city repeatedly on resolutions and initiatives to move the city closer to its climate goals, such as the fossil fuel infrastructure ban and divestment from fossil fuels. Our previous mayor hosted a meeting of local government and environmental leaders with 350.org co-founder Bill McKibben. Does this sound like a terrorist organization? Of course not. 350 PDX works the full range of climate solutions, from collaboration with you to rousing the public to raise their voices to stop dangerous initiatives such as the Jordan Cove Project. Does this sound like terrorism? Of course not. Occasionally, we put our kayaks in the river to try to protect the Arctic from oil drilling, or our bodies on railroad tracks to stop dangerous trains, oil trains. We never hurt anyone or damage property. We don't run away if authorities come to arrest us. Does that sound like terrorism? Of course not. Yet we know, courtesy of The Guardian, that the FBI is watching 350.org and the network we are a part of. Their interest in peaceful groups like ours takes resources away from the genuinely dangerous. Surveillance of this type creates a chilling effect, reminiscent of the McCarthy era, when people were afraid to sign a petition or attend a meeting. We especially want immigrants, refugees, the Muslim community, and people of color to feel safe enough to exercise their rights as part of our movement and community as well. Whether or not the city is in a formal partnership with the FBI, the Portland Police Department can and will cooperate and work with them in appropriate emergencies. But the city does not need and should not be a partner to the secretive and unlawful work of the FBI against groups such as 350 PDX. We urge you to withdraw by passing the resolution. And I have stapled a copy of the Guardian article to my remarks that I will give you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Next three are Olivia Catby-Smith, Emery Mort, and Malcolm Chaddock, and they'll be followed by Dan Handelman, Mark Kramer, and Ned Roche.
Sure.
Good afternoon.
Hello. My name is Olivia Catby-Smith. I am with the Portland chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. I'm also a member of the Arab community here in Portland. I'm probably not going to say anything you haven't already heard, but I think the fact that you are hearing the same thing over and over again from so many different community members and organizations is a testament to what the people of Portland are asking you to do. Last Friday, the City Council unanimously rejected racism and white supremacy. To put these values into practice, we need to recognize and reject the racism in federal immigration enforcement by DHS and ICE. President Trump has been clear in his bigotry against Muslims and immigrants, and DHS internment camps overflow with children from Latin America. Even if you try to wall off Portland from ICE, policies of the JTTF are set in Washington, D.C., not in Portland. The only way Portland can prevent ICE abuses is to refuse to participate in the JTTF. The FBI tells us that this task force makes our city safer. We want to know safer for whom. It doesn't make it safer for Muslims, immigrants, people of color, and activists who are disproportionately targeted and surveilled by this task force. I'd also like to know why we're so eager to take the word of an abusive agency like the FBI, who have sided with the KKK as victims versus civil rights organizations, over the word of community members who you claim to represent. I just want to reiterate that by voting to stay in this task force, you will be siding with the FBI over community members like Millie, and after hearing her testimony, I don't know how you can stomach that. Some officials say we should stay in the JTTF as long as there's no evidence of wrongdoing, But that is an impossible burden to put on our communities. JTTF units nationally have engaged in entrapment, surveillance of activists, investigations motivated by bigotry, and have protected white nationalists from prosecution. But if such abuses happen locally, people may not come forward because of fears of deportation, and communities are made compliant by fear. There is more than enough evidence that the JTTF elsewhere has engaged in this wrongdoing. But by saying you need more evidence specific to Portland, you are signaling that you would rather sit on your hands and wait for something else bad to happen to our vulnerable communities, rather than take proactive steps to prevent something like that from occurring based on evidence and testimony you've already been presented with. We call on our city council to protect our city from JTTF abuses now, not when it's already too late, and we promise to replace anyone who votes to stay in this task force with people who actually fight in solidarity with us.
Good afternoon.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Emery Mort with Portland's Resistance, and we strongly urge accepting Commissioner Hardisty's resolution for withdrawal from the Federal Joint Terrorism Task Force. Today, we want to speak specifically in solidarity with activists, organizers, and all those who stand apart, people who are frequent targets of FBI JTTF counterterrorism efforts. We invite you to consider the following pattern. Native peoples lead the fight against pipelines in Standing Rock and across the country. They call themselves water protectors. To the FBI, they're potential eco-terrorists. Black Americans unite in the streets to demand justice and dignity. They call themselves perhaps Black Lives Matter. To federal agents, they're Black identity extremists. Our neighbors here go to the border or to our local secret prisons, standing up to protect immigrants, refugees, children. They might call themselves Occupy ICE. Federal and local agents beg to be allowed to unleash the full force of the law on these heroes. Socialists, communists, anarchists say we all have the right to health care, houses, streets without armed militias. They stand strong as proud anti-fascists. Our chief of police goes on right-wing hate radio to discuss whether these heroes, too, are terrorists who just need their butts kicked by our heavily militarized police. And as we all know, this is just a start to a long list of persecuted activists, organizers, and people who stand apart. In exchange for this coordinated reactionary force, what do we get in return? Do we get safeguards, protections for whistleblowers, a society free from daily mass shootings and terrorizing events, warnings to maybe stop doing wars to create more terrorism? No, we get the opposite. And we hear from leaders a folksy Portland wisdom. Work across departments. Well, we'd sure like it if your offices took a break from meeting with the FBI. We need to stay in because Portland needs a seat at the table. I see a table and I see 50 different groups in these seats voicing our sincere concerns and our vision. And speaking of vision, we hear in op-eds a progressive vision that cities from Oakland to New York will stay united in the JTTF. My time is up here, but I think it's safe to say that our vision is about 180 degrees different from that. And despite the opposition, we here believe that together we will win.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Malcolm Chaddock, and I'm here on behalf of Individuals for Justice. I have the dubious distinction of having had membership in two groups which have been declared to be enemies of the state by the FBI, Peace Fresno and Veterans for Peace, which was on the terrorism watch list for some time. In 2003, I came here to Portland, and within 48 hours, I was in these chambers testifying to what happened to my very first peace group, Peace Fresno, and that we had had an infiltrator in our midst, contrary to California Constitution. Now, I know that's not a local phenomenon, but it is indicative of the repeated practice of the FBI and those that it works with. And since that time, we've been having this debate every so often, and the same set of circumstances seem to obtain. You get rooms full of people saying we need to get out or stay out, depending upon the circumstance. And here we are again. The theme has been beaten and beaten to death. The FBI can't be trusted to play by any sort of rules but its own. And the people of this city don't want anything to do with them. So I think that maybe this time, it's time to actually get out. Thank you.
Thank you. Next three, please, Carla.
Next three are Dan Hendelman, Mark Kramer, and Ned Roche, and they'll be followed by Nathalie Paravicini, Jacob, and Alex Wise.
I think you're first.
Please.
Am I waiting for Mayor Wheeler to call my name, or?
No, go ahead.
All right, well,
Please state your name. Welcome, and please state your name for the record. I'm
Thank
currently
you.
acting president of the council.
Thank you, President Udaly. President Udaly and Mayor's, absent Mayor Wheeler and members of council. My name is Dan Handelman, representing Peace and Justice Works in our project group, Portland Cop Watch. We observed yesterday's work session, read Commissioner Fish's op-ed, and looked at the counter legislation being proposed for today's hearing. Our group still believes the best course of action is to stay out of the JTTF. Other task forces involving Portland police do not have the same documented history of involving the FBI inappropriately focusing on people of color, immigrants, and others in violation of Oregon's anti-spying statute. The proposed amendments to the current agreement with the FBI do not fix the problem of deputizing PPB officers, which is not needed for investigations, including the Molotov cocktail threat against Mayor Wheeler. Agreeing to wall off PPB from immigration issues will not guarantee compliance with the Oregon sanctuary law. The FBI runs the task force. Portland cannot override their actions. FBI special agent in charge stated repeatedly, including in his Oregonian op-ed, he can't guarantee the task force won't utilize immigration charges, and such actions are used when there are no other options to disrupt crime or violence. If Portland officers participate in an investigation on the front end and the FBI turns the alleged suspect over to another agency for deportation for lack of prosecutable criminal activity, the PPB has participated in the immigration aspect of the JTTF. The end result is the same as if the PPB did the investigation themselves. Requiring the chief to seek security clearance doesn't change anything. City policy already asks the chief to get top secret clearance. The issue is the Bureau's civilian commissioner does not have access to the same information. That's why Mayor Potter, former police chief, withdrew from the JTTF. The FBI claims Mayor Wheeler's one-day non-disclosure agreements are functionally the same as top secret clearance. We doubt that's true since he can't sit in with his officers for a debriefing without another waiver. Nobody in authority has been talking about changing our nation's reliance on using violence to enforce state policy, which leads to so-called terrorism. While attempting to address problems of being in the JTTF, any tweaks to the current status quo do not protect civil liberties. Support the resolution to withdraw from the JTTF. And I do want to point out that the letter that you were handed by Kimberly from the ACLU does have 50 signatures on it of different organizations, most of whom are here today.
Welcome, please state your name for the record.
Members of the council, my name is Mark Kramer. I've been a member of the National Lawyers Guild since 1981. The Guild has been supporting and protecting civil liberties and police accountability in Portland and beyond since that time and before. Along with other concerned citizens, we advocated to have Portland withdraw from JTTF in 2012, only to see us return in 2015. I have some personal experience with surveillance overreach. More than 30 years ago, I had the dubious honor of being included in the PPB Red Squad files. In litigation which led to the dismantling of the Red Squad, the Bureau admitted to using paid agents, volunteer informers, and other techniques to monitor dissenters, and agreed that even reasonable suspicion of something as trivial as trespass triggers their response. I was included in the Red Squad not for terrorist or subversive activities, but for representing individuals protesting against apartheid and U.S.-supported repression in Central America. So that informs our analysis today. We have three specific problems, or many specific problems, with the JTTF. One is that the lack of classification. The mayor does not have classification. We don't believe that the de facto classification that's been applied for will suffice. It is essential that the mayor and the commissioner of police, and also we advance, the director of IPR have a role and be given security clearance before Portland continues in the JTTF. The existing memorandum of understanding provides that each JTF member will be subject to the personal rules and regulations of the PPB. However, without the mayor and IPR and the commissioner getting the security clearance, there is no way to enforce that. By participating in the JTTF, the PPB will lose autonomy in investigations. So if there is a JTTF investigation, the police, our bureau, may not do collateral investigations, may not do independent investigations. It is limited to the JTTF agenda. For those and other reasons, we urge you to support Commissioner Hardisty's proposal to remove Portland from the JTTF. Thank you.
Thank you, and perfect timing. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Ned Roche, and I speak as a member of the Jewish community active nationally with Jews, Muslims, and allies in the Network Against Racism and Islamophobia. We know two things about the JTTF. One is that participation in it does not guarantee safety. The most deadly anti-Semitic attack in American history recently took place in Pittsburgh while that city was actively engaged with the JTTF. The second thing we know is that collaborating with the FBI and ICE through the JTTF means embracing intrusive surveillance, frightening levels of Islamophobia, and the targeting of immigrants, people of color, and activists. We want our city council to be part of imagining the future we collectively dare to create. In thinking about what community and safety might look like, we need revolutionary vision and radical imagination, because it's our imagination, not partnerships with ICE and the FBI, that tells us what's possible. Security is important because it gives us a sense of what we're fighting against. But imagination and community are key because they tell us what we're fighting for. The elusive search for security for some must not come at the expense of freedom for others. To build our future, we need solidarity among all who call Portland home. We need the people who are in targeted communities, as it is they who enrich our lives, and they desperately need us to think, act, and vote inclusively. We urge you to affirm the dignity of all who live in our community and withdraw from the JTTF. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dan, I apologize for getting up. I do have the testimony on my laptop, so I heard it, and I apologize for that. Next three, please.
Are Nathalie Paravicini, Jacob and Alex Wise, and they'll be followed by Teresa Rayford, Lightning Superhumanity, and Edith Gillis.
Good afternoon. Would you like to start, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Nathalie Paravicini. I'm a doctor and I serve the migrant community, but I'm also a state co-chair of the Pacific Green Party, and I'm here to urge you to vote to withdraw immediately from the JTTF. For one thing, we pay enough taxes to the federal government for them to afford enough resources locally. We do not need to invest our own local resources to any further action with an organization that has an abysmal track record that lasts to this date. My English is not that good today.
It's fine. It's fine. It's good.
And what really makes us secure is a police force or security force that works with our community, that is part of our community, that's not antagonizing our community. And any association with ICE is totally contrary to public safety and to the public well-being and I speak from a doctor, because when our migrant people don't go to the clinic because they're afraid, then we have more epidemics and more public health issues. So I didn't prepare any statements, but we're very strong in the Green Party that we want the Portland to leave the joint task force immediately, and we're very determined that if that doesn't happen, we will take note and we will elect more people on the city council to make that a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Wise. I'm representing People Organizing for Philippine Solidarity, which is a Showing Up for Racial Justice action group and a member of the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. We are asking that the city withdraw from this task force and would like to share our experience with the U.S. government torturing a guest of ours. In the Philippines under Duterte, there's always a fresh outrage. Yesterday, he arrested a journalist and Time Person of the Year. This is part of a crackdown on all opposition happening with the complicity of the US government. In April 2018, we invited speakers from the Philippines for a Stop the Killings national speaking tour against the tens of thousands of extrajudicial killings. We invited Jerome Abba, a young leader of a Moro indigenous Muslim community organization which works for peace. His homeland is in the poorest part of the country, experiencing a multi-sided civil war and martial law. He had a brand new 10-year US entry visa and speaking invitations from groups like us and the United Methodist Church. Abba was stopped at the San Francisco airport and refused entry by Customs and Border Protection, a member of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. For over 20 hours, he was then treated like you see a terrorist interrogation on television, being forced to strip naked in front of an industrial fan blowing cold air, forced to sign a blank confession, offered only a ham sandwich to eat, and restricted water. He was repeatedly accused of being a terrorist and a communist, asked about his personal political beliefs and who he knows. They played psychological games, leaving him alone with a grenade on the table in front of him. He was told he had no human rights and was denied access to a lawyer and any communication at all for hours. At the airport and around the country, we protested for him, and thankfully he was not disappeared to a black site. He was put on a plane and deported back to the Philippines. And the San Francisco city government, which I believe is not a member of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, passed a resolution asking for an independent investigation. We want you to follow their example, stand up for civil and human rights against the federal government, and leave the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioner Hardesty. Commissioners, thank you for letting us speak before you today. My name is Jacob Barreros. I'm the founder of Direct Action Alliance, co-founder of Occupy ICE PDX, founder of 5th District Progressive out in Clackamas County, and I currently work with Fem Strike Back, Empower Portland, among other groups locally. What we do is we stand up for our neighbors because our government isn't doing it well enough right now. I'm also a member of Portland Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines. My family is from Cotabato in Mindanao, which is now currently under martial law, and I've seen far too severe a price being paid by people in my own family for when the government is allowed to run rampant and run amok without any accountability. We know for a fact right now that the Portland Police does not have any accountability. We know for a fact that our federal agencies, law enforcement agencies, have no accountability for when they break the law. What recourse does the community have? We don't have any recourse currently. So what is to stop them from breaking the law? What is to stop them from not acknowledging any of the agreements that you make? What do we know for a fact? We know a few things for a fact. For a fact, we know that the bombing in Boston occurred despite being part of the JTTF. We know for a fact that the shooting at the Pittsburgh Synagogue occurred despite being a member of the JTTF. We know that here in Portland, Millie's family was abused, was treated in the most harsh, disgusting way. I was upstairs and I had to go outside and smoke a cigarette. It was enraging. One victim is too much. One victim is too much. We can't have more. We know for a fact that this does not make us safer. We know for a fact that it hurts our community. It is up to you guys to make a difference. Not all of us can make a difference. We are one people. That's why we have to band together and become groups. But you up there, you speak with the full power of the city of Portland, and we are demanding that you withdraw from this unjust task force. Stand up for us. Inspire our youth. Inspire my kids. Inspire your kids. Do the right thing, please.
Thank you.
Next three, please.
The next three are Teresa Rayford, Lightning Superhumanity, and Edith Gillis. And they'll be followed by John, Brian King, and Ned Roche. Oh, did he skip?
Good afternoon. Teresa, you want to start?
Of course. So for the record, my name is Teresa Rayford. I'm a native Oregonian and the founder of Don't Shoot Portland. And we don't have to assume anything. The last time that was brought forth to the council, as a community organizer, I organized in my community, I educated community, I spent my own time and energy, to the detriment of even my health, to organize community around this issue, to educate them on their involvement and what that could mean for our city. Out of the 30 people that showed up in 2015 to give their testimony, the people from the Black community, including the children, I can say that all of them have been arrested And many of those arrests occurred in 2015 following all of our testimonies. Throughout the year following the testimony, after you guys voted to participate, when we asked you to withdraw, when we gave you valid reasons to withdraw, when different organizations came here with experience and data to tell you to withdraw, people like myself were humiliated, we were discredited, we were arrested, and we were emotionally traumatized. It's terrorism, it's clear terrorism. And if you don't understand why black people in Portland protest or black people in America protest today, you don't have to go any further than to look downstairs in the display case that's on display right now for Black History Month. Crack, guns, money, the drugs that were brought into our community, the participation with community partners and agencies, the continued participation in community policing against our bodies, the removal of our children, the mass incarceration. These audits don't lie. We might want to say that the city and the JTTF has nothing to do with our education system, but when we have officers in there and they have access to resources within the city's coffers and bureaus that can actually give them an opportunity to investigate and interrogate without us even having the opportunity to participate, and when those same agencies have the opportunity to have us waive our FERPA rights so that we don't have the benefit of privacy, then that's a problem. And for all the communities that are speaking out today, people in this country, the ones that wrote the language that created the oppression, the capitalism, the patriarchy system that binds us and ties us to this type of interrupted behavior, this type of trauma, you understand that you did it for us. Thank you for including us, but you need to withdraw. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Superhumanity. One of the best things I think you did, Mayor, was bringing in Police Chief Outlaw. I'm going to stand alongside her on this decision. I'm going to request that she does have security clearance. I'd also like to have every one of you to apply and to try to get security clearance. I want to understand what her position will be on the reports that will be supplied and furnished to the public. I want to have a clear understanding on her position on why this will be beneficial to stay with JTTF. And I'm going to go by what she says based upon her training, based upon her experience, and I will rely upon her to protect the interests of the people in this city. Now, my position, again, plain and simple, is that 18 U.S.C. 871, threats against president and successors to the presidency, domestic terrorism. Well, you know what? When you're dealing against the FBI, you want people also within the FBI who have a clear understanding about a lot of the people in this city. You need to have somebody in there. You need to have somebody you can trust. I trust Police Chief Outlaw. I trust her with the people of this city. And I will go along with her decision on this at the end of the day. And she understands by her stepping out like that, all the people in this city will be watching her very close on this. And they do want improvements made to it. They do want different things and adjustments made to it. And I think she's going to get the job done on this. And I want her to have the right. She can withdraw immediately at any time. And the FBI needs to understand this right up front. If she decides to do that, we are out. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
My name is Edith Gillis, and I've given the clerk for you the lyrics that the Portland Raging Granny sang this morning, or this afternoon. The Portland Raging Grannies are opposed to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. I am here now as an individual. I have been wearing these clothes in mourning for decades for people who have been murdered by the Portland police through no excuse. My children have been traumatized for 12 and a half years after many police tried to murder me when I tried to stop one cop from unlawfully murdering a peacekeeper who was law-abiding and peaceful. My elderly neighbor, Azzy, was taken to the hospital last night because she was so overwhelmed that 3 of her family members had been murdered by the Portland police, that she's just not able just to get up and get out. She has bed sores, has to have surgery, may die from it. Larry Nicholas is having his birthday tomorrow on Valentine's Day. For 5.5 months, he has been in ICE custody, taken to Tacoma, because he was unlawfully jailed because of having mental illness from years of trauma and abuse in the Philippines. Over 6,000 Filipinos are forced to leave, and over 27,000 have been murdered that we know of just recently. Being the JTTF did not protect my neighbor, who's just found out last night that another family member was murdered or died in custody last night. We don't know the details yet. They keep lying to us. Being the JTF did not stop the deaths, disabilities, and terrorism of racism. Being the JTF didn't protect me and my fellow medic, one upstairs who MLK weekend was afraid that the Joy Gibson goons were stalking, were going to abuse us, probably beat me to death. They didn't stop Joy Gibson from assaulting me or assaulting a sweet, innocent little boy standing on the sidewalk. Get out of the JTF now.
Thank you. Next 3, please, Carla.
Next 3 are John, just the name is John only, and then Brian King and Mark Goodson. And then the last 3 who signed up will be Maggie, Marty Slapikas, and Eric D. Fletcher.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, thank you. My name is Brian King. I'm a resident of Portland. The issue of the day is community safety. Historically, when Portland City Council considers safety, it is prioritizing the safety of white property owners. In light of last Friday's resolution against white supremacy, we should be considering the racism in the JTTF agencies when considering our partnerships. In 2012, a white man named Christopher Barker, a leader of the Klan faction called the Loyal White Knights, assisted in a plot to attack mosques with a radiation weapon. The FBI intercepted and stopped this plot to its credit, but notably no JTTF unit was involved. The FBI intervened in the prosecution of Mr. Barker, got him parole, and made him a paid informant under the direction of the Greensboro, North Carolina JTTF. During his years under the care of the JTTF, Mr. Barker was charged with multiple counts of assault, including assaults on his wife. He was charged with arson, theft, possession of war weapons, associating with violent extremists in violation of parole, and attempted murder against another Klansman. In 2016, the state attempted to prosecute Mr. Barker for attempted murder. The JTTF petitioned to have the terms of his parole retroactively lifted so that he would not be charged with those parole violations. In 2017, Mr. Barker made bond on the attempted murder charges and was released after only 3 months in prison. Assault, weapons charges, and attempted murder are the results of the Greensboro JTTF's work for public safety when a white man was charged with terrorism. We've been told to only consider the behavior of our local JTTF, so it's important to note that the initial intervention for Mr. Barker came from the national FBI attorney in Washington, D.C. These agencies don't respect Portland laws, they don't respect Oregon laws, as we've heard yesterday. They work on their own agenda. What happens when a Muslim person of color is accused of terrorism? The East Bay Express, a California weekly paper, investigated FBI charges against 5 terrorism suspects. In each of these cases, the suspects were young Muslim men who were vulnerable due to mental illness, precarious employment, or family estrangements. They ended up being entrapped and set up for decades in prison. The racism is clear. If you're a white man, you're free and on the FBI's payroll. If you're a Muslim immigrant, you're set up for decades in prison. To combat racism in the JTTF, we must withdraw.
Thank you. My name's John. I'm here to talk about a few things. One, I want to reiterate the concern that was brought up yesterday about the FBI labeling the protest in California as a KKK rally, where leftists were targeted afterwards and surveilled, pointing out that the KKK were not present and the traditionalist workers' parties and the Golden State skinheads were present, which the concern here is that it shows that they obviously don't know anything about white nationalist and neo-Nazi groups if they're confusing those two. Though they have similar ideologies, they're 2-3 totally different organizations. So I wanted to point that out because one of the arguments is that we need these people to protect certain communities from these white nationalist and neo-Nazi organizations. I also want to point out that I've had many very bad interactions with law enforcement, and though I will show them respect for the most part, I don't trust any of them. And this has changed drastically in the last couple years because of my experiences with them. One of the first ones was in May Day 2017, the one that was deemed a riot here. And I witnessed and experienced use of force on myself and also another individual that was punched and tackled to the ground by the Portland Police Bureau. Later found out that this person was not even a part of the protest, was just a random citizen that was walking through the city of Portland. Another being Occupy ICE, where on 3 different occasions, Department of Homeland Security attacked protesters and then lied about it. And then most recently was my experience with working with people on the border, providing humanitarian efforts. And about half of the people, about 7 people that I interact with down there, were stopped by Border Patrol on the way back through, interrogated, some for up to 9 hours, having cell phones taken, birth certificates, personal information taken. So my point to this is that these are all law enforcement agencies, some of them are federal, and the FBI is not exempt to abuse. I believe this is something that runs rampant in law enforcement and is a cultural issue within those agencies, and policies aren't going to change that.
Thank you, both.
Last 3 who signed up are Maggie, Marty Slapikas, and Eric D. Fletcher.
Good afternoon.
Age before beauty.
Sir, would you like to go ahead, please? Thank you.
My name is Marty Slapikas. I wish I could say I represented a whole bunch of people. I don't. I'm here on my own, and I have several comments. One is, a definition of terrorism is the use of violence against civilians to promote a cause so unpopular that it cannot succeed without an element of intimidation. That involves terrorism, international, domestic terrorism, and the current threat. Back in months before the year 2000, many months before 9/11, the United States Commission on National Security issued a report co-chaired by former Senators Redmond and Hart outlining threats and recommendations as to what must be done to counteract the threats to the United States. The Commission report listed 6 threat areas, biological, cyber, nuclear, chemical, radiological, and enhanced conventional. Also listed were 7 strategic functions: deterrence, prevention, preemption, crisis management, consequence management, attribution, and retaliation. 4 levels of involvement were listed, and they are federal, state, local, and private. Each level of government involvement might need to satisfy 42 distinct mission areas. Most, if not all, of the mission areas require gathering current and accurate information. When I was entering Portland for the first time, crossing I-5 interstate bridge late Sunday night, in November 13, 1988. I was unaware that Oregon had passed a state law in 1987, or ORS 181-850. It was caused by an incident in 1977. A lawsuit resulted in the Oregon revised statute that created Oregon's sanctuary law. To make my testimony more shorter and hopefully meet with the timeline, by pulling out of the Federal Joint Terrorism Task Force, limiting cooperation between an agency with vast more information, gathering assets than Portland. And see the attachment 1 I put in there. 63 areas of gathering information from around the world come into the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Our city decreases the safety that state and city citizens believe they are offering to those who seek a sanctuary from their former countries. Now, I've got concerns, and I'll just list them If the city of Portland is no longer to participate in its share of national security, does the city have the resources to protect its citizen from the threats listed in the commission's report? Will the city of Portland no longer share its information with the federal government?
Sir, I'll need you to wrap it up.
Okay, all right. City leaders desire Portland's participation in the global economy. Like it or not, Portland is on a global two-way street. Participating in the global economy should clearly alert city leaders to take notice of the obvious threat of global international terrorism to our local citizens, institutions, and economy. The city of Portland shares a part in the national fight against terrorism to protect our civil rights and existence. I do not suggest pulling out of the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
Thank you for being here. Good afternoon.
Hi. As some of you may know, I'm the granddaughter of an Armenian immigrant. And back in the day, it was McCarthyism. And, you know, it's, you know, when your mother comes home from school and she has to say, "Dad, everybody keeps asking me what I am." You're American. That's what you are. Instilling fear into people. I mean, we've had foreign-born people from all over the world serve in our military. We have a grand tradition of migration and integration of culture. You know, I grew up around 3 military bases because war drives migration. And Korean, Japanese, German, Vietnamese, Cambodian, you know, all these people. You know, I ate my way through the kimchi and the sushi and the German stolen and global warming. It's all going to drive migration. We have to stop being so paranoid. You know what creates violence and lack of safety is marginalization. Creates lack of safety. And that's what we need to focus on. We need to focus on integrating everyone into the community and saying you're valued and you're valuable and your input matters. That's what makes a safer community. So I would like everyone's input to matter.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all who signed up.
All right, very good. So commissioners, would you like to invite some of our expert testimony back up to ask questions? Did you not get a chance to testify, Philip?
He didn't sign up.
Okay, come on. Fine. Yes. And the list is closed. This is it. It's fine.
Alyssa, 38, I believe, or 39.
Did you get skipped? Yeah, come on. If you were on the list, come on.
All right.
Yeah. We'll let Philip, he's testifying right now.
My name is Mark Goodson.
No, one second. Philip's
sorry.
testifying.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
So
Thanks.
Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for providing our community with a voice to speak on this. I think largely we see distrust in the federal government, and I think that's duly noted, and it feels good to be part of a community that is politically aware and progressive, and I thank everybody who has stepped up and spoke today to address the withdrawal from this. So I guess when you think about the way that terrorism has been like the name tag for convincing the populations of the U.S. to go to war during the Iraq War, how the media uses that kind of terminology and fear tactic. It's interesting to really analyze like what the task force is aligned to do, and we see that there's obviously a lot of bad policy coming from that group, as seen through different accounts that we've heard today. So going back to the healthy amount of distrust that we have for the government, the federal government, I do thank you for being here in this council and again providing space. But I think it's concerning, and I think that we do need to understand, like, if we withdraw from this agreement, like, who's to say that they're not going to continue doing the same thing that they've been doing? So what is our, how are we going to police them, policing the people after we withdraw, if we withdraw? You see what I'm saying? When can we have a meaningful place for safe dissent? And, you know, I feel like we need to be progressive in this and take this seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Very good. Colleagues, what's your pleasure?
Mayor, to your point, I believe that out of 38 speakers, we had one person testify in favor of us staying, so I don't know that there's a need for us.
It was
I'm
at
sorry,
least
two.
twice that many. It was at least two.
Twice that many, okay. My bad, I must have been at the restroom when the other one spoke. But having said that, I don't see a need to repeat testimony we heard yesterday, so if my colleagues are ready, I'm ready to call for the vote.
I would actually like to ask some questions because, yeah, and I've heard the testimony and I appreciate it, but I still have some questions that I'd like to clarify.
Mayor, I just
Commissioner
want to
Fisher.
correct the record on one point. We have received a lot of testimony, written testimony and emails, and we've heard from a lot of people who actually support the JTTF who are not here today. The record includes emails, letters, and testimony, and I don't want to diminish anyone's voice just because they couldn't be here.
And before you move on, Mayor, if I may.
Certainly.
I noticed in the ordinance that it's called out that it would be binding city policy. I believe we need to add that to the resolution, to add a further be it resolved that this resolution is binding city policy.
I would second that.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fritz. We have a second from Commissioner Hardesty on the point of making the resolution binding city policy, which would be parallel language to what was in the ordinance. Any discussion? Legal counsel, are there any issues we should be aware of?
None, Mayor.
Very good. Call the roll.
Fritz. Aye. Fish.
This puts the resolution and the ordinance on equal footing in terms of binding city policy, and I think that's fair. Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
I support the amendment. Aye. The amendment passes. So to the main motion, I have a number of questions, unless anybody, I typically let my colleagues go first. I'm not sure who I'm asking these questions of, so maybe I'll ask them, and maybe Kimberly, I know you're still here, perhaps you would like to have a shot at these. AC Resch is here, perhaps she would like to have a shot at these, but they're questions that have been looming. Some of them have been raised by testimony today, and I start with the assumption that Casey Jama got it right when he started us off, and he said we're all here for the same reason. We all want what's in the best interest of the community. We may just fundamentally disagree about the best strategy to get there. So my question is this. If we choose to withdraw from the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the task force doesn't go away. The task force continues to operate without us. Doesn't that mean we're missing the opportunity to assist with priorities, with policies, and bringing our city's value to the table? And if that's true, how does that possibly help protect or serve our community?
Mayor Wheeler and members of the commission, I think my answer will come back to what I was talking about earlier, which is trust. And while we have a greater degree of trust with our local law enforcement, we don't trust the FBI and the JTTF and ICE. And so the idea that our officers in working for the JTTF is somehow going to transform a massively long history of rights violations by the FBI and by various JTTFs around the country, it's dubious to us. And that doesn't mean that I don't trust that our local law enforcement would do the best that they can to advocate. I take them at their word. But I think that this is an issue where we just have a lack of trust. And again, I think as we pointed out before, that if something rises to the level where an investigation can happen under Oregon law, right, where we're not proceeding before we have reasonable suspicion and probable cause, as the FBI often does, if there are actual threats and there's actual evidence that something is going on and there is a need to collaborate, we're not saying that collaboration should not happen in those instances.
Could I ask a follow-up to that? Because
Sure.
that was also raised by a number of the people who testified eloquently earlier. In fact, somebody had said, sharing information when, quote, actual threats are upon us, unquote. Somebody else said, when circumstances warrant. But if we have withdrawn from the terrorism task force, aren't we putting the burden on the FBI to let us know when there is, quote, an actual threat, unquote, and aren't we letting them decide what circumstances qualify as circumstances that warrant our participation?
I don't know if I follow you there, Mayor Wheeler. The idea that we somehow have to be inside and seeing all the same information that the FBI sees in order to decide what we're walling ourselves off from or not walling ourselves off from,
Well, you had said,
compared to the idea that if the FBI actually sees a credible threat and they come to us and ask us to engage and our law enforcement follows our own law enforcement policies. I'm not following you.
Okay, well, I may have misunderstood your testimony, because I thought I heard you say we could enter into an arrangement where there's sharing information when an actual threat has been identified.
Sure, I mean,
But my
before we
point
had
is
the
simply-
JTTF, if there was a threat to the city of Portland and the FBI knew about it, they could certainly come to the city of Portland and tell the city of Portland and local law enforcement about that threat. That existed before the JTTF, that exists now, it exists independent. There are places that don't have a JTTF, and I'm sure that if the FBI knew that there was some credible threat to a city that is not in a JTTF, they're not going to just not communicate with
So you
them.
do trust the FBI? In this case, you're trusting that the FBI will let us know if there is a credible threat. Is that right or not right?
So let me get you here. So what you're saying is that by having members of inside in the JTTF,
At the beginning, as Chief Outlaw
that-
suggested in her testimony.
that
yes.
they're then going to have access to all the information that the FBI has, and so therefore, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just not following your logic.
Let me let these folks have a shot at that, and maybe I'll try again.
So in answer to your question, Mayor, that is exactly one of the points that I made yesterday, is that allowing the officers to be engaged from the very beginning does allow Portland to have an influence on what we determine is an actual credible threat to our city. If we do not have that, we are relying on the FBI to contact us when they feel that threat is necessary and when they feel it's necessary to bring us into the conversation. We are also not allowed at the very beginning to apply any of our resources when maybe we determine that it wasn't a threat, but there is another way to go about this problem. We mentioned our behavioral health unit. We mentioned our youth services. We mentioned the councils that we have access to and the community members who support us. So it is a detriment when we are not there at the beginning. We are not allowed to put any type of Portland lens in looking at these cases. The FBI brings those to us.
Do you
Can
believe?
I ask just one quick question? Because
Sure.
I've never worked for the FBI, but Mike German has, and he is still here. And he is the expert on why these intricacies, like the things that you're asking, I understand, but I'm unable to articulate it in the same way that I think Mike could. And
Sure.
if I could have him come back up and
Yeah,
answer
if
your
he's still
question, that
here,
would be
absolutely.
really helpful.
Sorry, and I didn't mean to be disrespectful, Mike. I thought you caught a flight.
Thank you. And I would have, but Alaska Airlines decided they wanted me to stay here a couple more hours.
That's destiny. You know
Yes.
that, right? Good.
Yes.
Thank you. Did you hear my question?
I did,
Good. Okay, thank you.
and I think, and I appreciate you jumping in, but I think it's a misunderstanding of how a task force works, right? The reason you bring all these different people together is because everybody else has a different aspect of the work that they're doing that has different talents that they bring and also things they can't do. So the idea of bringing them together is to take advantage of all of that. So in your suggestion, it's just as likely that it's the Portland Police that is bringing information to the FBI in the task force that is alerting them to a potential problem.
But not if we're
the
not in
other.
it.
Oh, no, absolutely. The Portland Police can call the Joint Terrorism Task Force and say, hey, we think we have a problem here. I mean, that wouldn't be changed by the withdrawal. So I talked about it yesterday, the triage, right? The FBI has moved to a formula where they open up the spigots on intelligence collection, see something, say something, every tip and lead is coming in, and every tip and lead gets followed. And that just burns up so much resources on low-level things that you're not seeing what are the real threats. So the way the Portland Police interact with the community, they will more likely be the ones who know about things that are going on. And where the FBI has something that rises to the level of reasonable suspicion, that's when they open a full investigation, and that's when they can engage with the local
That's
police.
helpful, and I appreciate that perspective. Let me ask you a question about transparency, because transparency came up. A number of people mentioned it. They said that the nature of the task force is such that in dealing with intelligence, they're not as forthcoming as a lot of people in the community would like. Does the task force become more or less transparent by our withdrawal?
To us, it becomes less transparent.
How?
They are not required to tell us anything unless there's that threat. So what they're doing is not going to be told to us.
So there was some testimony I really enjoyed earlier by somebody who I like very much, and I won't call her out, but we almost always disagree. But I always appreciate her testimony, and I always appreciate her passion and her leadership in the community. And I've concluded that no matter what issue we are discussing, it's about engagement versus withdrawal. And you can think of some cases where it makes sense to actively engage, and I tipped my hand a little bit. I said I think it's important for us to engage so we can establish priorities, we can establish policies, and we can bring our values to that table. I think that's, personally, I think that's really important. I know a lot of people here don't agree, and that's fine. There are other policies where people say withdrawal is more important. But this is an unusual issue. This isn't stock divestiture or something trivial. We are talking about situations where the public safety and well-being hangs in the balance. How does withdrawal provide the stronger commitment to safety and well-being? And I heard a lot of great values espoused, but while values are incredibly important, values in and of themselves don't protect the public. So how does that withdrawal versus engagement move the interests of the public with regard to safety or well-being?
So I would argue that that table should be at the Portland Police Department, not at the FBI. Let the FBI come to the table under the rules that the Portland Police have, and they can do that engagement using standards that the citizens of Oregon and Portland have agreed will govern their law enforcement activities.
But isn't that what we could do through Commissioner Fish's recommendation of let's put the sideboards on us? Let us decide what that partnership looks like and how we want to manage that policy rather than ceding it completely to the FBI, which is what we'd be doing if we withdraw.
Well, I would argue that the way you're going to get the FBI to cooperate and raise their standards is by refusing to join their task force and work under their standards.
Do you have evidence of that strategy would actually work?
That's why I come here so often and give you so much credit for being a leader on this topic and actually creating this conversation, but it's still a brand new conversation. And they've started it in San Francisco, and they're starting it in Oakland, and I think I credit you for having had the courage to test this system. And, there is no guarantee of safety, but we cannot turn over our control to a secret institution that isn't responsive to our questions and concerns.
We serve with the FBI on more than just the Joint Terrorism Task Force. They work very, very closely with PPB on child exploitation, on sex trafficking, and unfortunately our community, you're probably aware of this, being on the I-5 corridor, is unfortunately a significant byway for sex trafficking, including international sex trafficking. There's been no proposal that we withdraw from those relationships. Is this a fundamentally different relationship in your opinion?
It is, in my opinion, certainly, because you have the history of the use of this term terrorism to justify targeting people for political reasons, targeting communities that don't necessarily have the majority protecting them. So this is different, number one. But number two, no, I would ask you after you withdraw from the Joint Terrorism Task Force to start looking at the other ones and see how they operate as well.
Commissioner Fish.
I think my colleagues, I have a sense that our colleagues have lengthy statements to read. I think since we have the benefit of getting you out of here by 5 and having statements, I think the sooner we move to statements, the better.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Call the roll.
Fritz.
Thank you, everybody who came today, everybody who sent in comments or called my office. This is an important question on which reasonable people can and do disagree. And it's so important that I'm going to read my speech because I don't want to miss any of it or to misstate anything. And I do appreciate that for the most part, comments have been constructive and focused on issues rather than directed at people and suggesting conflicting values. We all want to be safe. The question before us is what will make us safe? I support this resolution for 4 main reasons. Oregon law does not allow surveillance without reasonable suspicion a crime has been committed. FBI directives allow that surveillance. Participating in the JTTF gives Portland police officers access to information they should not know. Surveillance without reasonable cause is illegal in Oregon, regardless of who is being investigated. I am unconvinced that the JTTF's focus has switched from perceived international terrorism to local threats, and I am more concerned for the rights of local people. When we participated on a limited basis, the Council was supposed to receive annual reports on activities of our officers. Those reports were ludicrous in the absence of meaningful information. We already tried the let's do it with sideboards, let's make them better, let's participate and make sure that we get them to give us information. It did not work. Since we have been full participants, we have been given no information at all until yesterday afternoon. There is no evidence that participation has made Portland safer. And my 4th point is that the current president has made clear his animosity towards Muslims, immigrants, and people of color. I found it hard to trust the FBI, even under President Obama. It's impossible now. The FBI states, we only use immigration violations when there are no other options to disrupt crimes of violence. Although I can't guarantee the task force won't utilize immigration charges, I can guarantee we will only utilize those charges when necessary. That is not at all reassuring. The FBI's website defines domestic terrorism as perpetrated by individuals and or groups inspired by or associated with primarily US-based movements that espouse extremist ideologies of a political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature. Who decides what is extremist when it comes to political, religious, social, racial, or environmental issues? The FBI this past December first identified the so-called Proud Boys as an extremist group, and then they announced that they are not. How do we know even who is considered appropriate to being investigated? The FBI's website further states, the FBI-led Joint Terrorism Task Force across the country are essential to the nation's success in combating terrorism. These JTTFs bring federal, state, and local agencies together on one team, allowing members to leverage one another's skills, authorities, and accesses to prevent and disrupt terrorist attacks across the country. Let me read that again. JTTFs bring federal, state, and local agencies together on one team, allowing members to leverage each other's skills, authorities, and accesses. Members leverage one another's authorities and accesses. That means that Portland's JTTF members have access to information they would not otherwise know, and under Oregon law they should not know, even though they didn't collect that information themselves. It means Portland police officers participating in the JTTF have discussions about information collected by other members in ways that Portland police officers are not allowed to collect information. I can believe just about that Portland police participating in the JTTF don't engage in surveillance without evidence that a person hasn't committed a crime. In fact, I do believe that because they have said so under the truthfulness oath. However, they are involved in discussions about information gathered by FBI staff who operate under the suspicion that a person may commit a crime and who are then specifically allowed to investigate people based on suspicion or association. There is no way to participate and wall off our officers from that information. In 2011, I voted to participate in the JTTF in a limited way. I thought Portland police officers would be a good addition to the group and promote adherence to our values. And I was promised the people of Portland would get more information on its work. I appreciate the testimony from the U.S. Attorney and FBI leadership stating that the participation of our officers has been helpful. The second part of the bargain didn't happen. The annual reports were ridiculously superficial, and we heard in the work session yesterday that this is the norm in other jurisdictions too. Good, transparent communication is just not what the FBI does. Our own police are put in the position of not communicating everything, even to elected officials, because it ostensibly jeopardizes our security. I'm concerned about the FBI's targeting communities of color, particularly black activists, under the pretense of protecting national security. The word security is an easy concept to stand behind because then you can justify just about anything. Surveillance, tracking citizens, profiling them, collecting data on them, keeping that data forever as an indictment of criminal intent whether there was or was not, and arresting people for no other crime than for being poor or simply peacefully expressing their dissatisfaction with government policies. We have been told that the JTF should now be considered the Joint Threat Task Force, and that it's now concentrating on hate crimes, including those threatened and perpetrated by white supremacists. As one of our human rights commissioners commented, white supremacists have constitutional rights too. Surveillance that is illegal in Oregon is illegal no matter who is targeted. If we don't all have rights, none of us has rights. It is also hard to believe that investigation of white supremacists is a true priority for the JTTF, as white supremacists appear to premeditate and commit violent acts across state lines virtually unchecked. We heard yesterday that hundreds of hate crimes were reported nationwide, and few of them, 40, were investigated, leading to arrest and conviction. While it is assumed that all parties to these investigations are operating in the best interest of the communities and residents of the United States, there are numerous examples nationally of stings, setups, surveillance, profiling, arrests for civil protest, manipulation and intimidation of and by the media, and arrests for simply researching and disseminating information about public safety. That makes this often a messy affair and one where public trust continues to be eroded. In Portland, what we need most of all is for everyone in the community to be able to trust everyone in the Portland Police Bureau. Trust is not earned by saying, "You can trust me." If there was a perfect world in which people had what they need, when there wasn't such a massive difference between those who believe they have the right to lord their wealth over the 99%, when gun proliferation and use is not so prevalent for the accumulation of wealth and the proliferation of fear, then we probably wouldn't be in this situation where we as human beings often cannot communicate with each other about our collective needs, and we must turn against our neighbors to fight each other. The meaning of the word fight is indicative of our problem. It means to struggle, to keep in check, to control, to stifle, to confront, to combat, to quarrel with, to argue with, all of which keeps us further and further from peaceful, constructive solutions, and each side digs in. Many politicians are fond of saying they will fight for things. I have worked hard to avoid using that word in any of my campaigns and throughout my time in office. If we are fighting, we have already lost at least part of our humanity, compassion, and willingness to hear the other person out, even if we vehemently disagree with every word and action they make. We must work for peace and to reduce fear for every person in our community. The City of Boston's participation in the JTTF did not prevent the Boston Marathon bombing, despite the fact that the FBI had interviewed the suspect 2 years before, but did not share that information with local law enforcement, according to the Boston Globe. The City of Portland's participation in the JTTF did not prevent the Max murders. The Portland Human Rights Commission stated prior to the hearing in 2015, federal guidelines governing FBI operations expanded to grant greater permissions and flexibility to the FBI for surveillance and investigation activities. The new guidelines have loosened previous restrictions, allowing greater agency discretion and permitting intrusions that erode civil liberties in the interest of protecting national security. The absence of oversight, accountability, and transparency inherently with a JTTF collaboration will exacerbate long-standing tensions stemming from racial profiling, use of force, and negative perceptions about Portland's police. That has proven an accurate prediction. I was reluctant to participate even under our President Obama. The present occupant of the White House has been very clear that he is obsessed with perceived threats from Muslims, Latinx people, and immigrants, and yet we're supposed to trust the JTTF more today than in 2015. Some of this speech was drafted by my Chief of Staff, Tom Bizot, in 2015, and it's really sad that the remarks are remarkably true again today. With the passage of the MOU in 2015, we officially entered the world where information is purposefully hidden from public view, and the City of Portland agreed to be complicit with that deception. We have no idea what our officers have spent their time doing over the past 4 years. We're assured that they've kept all laws, and that's it. Several weeks ago, I asked for a detailed report with specific information on this past year's outcomes. I had to ask for it again yesterday. Instead, we were given vague, anecdotal stories of a couple of cases where our officers connecting suspects to mental health services. The report was emailed to Council yesterday afternoon. I appreciate that it does contain a few specific numbers, including that approximately 300 threats were received in Oregon last year, and 4 resulted in law enforcement action in Portland. I was reminded of this when Mr. German was talking about the massive numbers of investigations in relation to the few actual threats. The remainder of yesterday's report is either vague or discusses cases and actions outside Oregon. This city has been focusing on performance metrics and annual dashboards measuring effectiveness since the City Budget Office was formed in 2013. If any of my bureaus had staff participating in a program for 4 years, and at the end of that time the staff couldn't point to many specific accomplishments, I would ask the director of that bureau to stop participating in the program. I'm not the police commissioner. However, thanks to Commissioner Hardesty, I am able to participate in this hugely important policy decision. I have not heard compelling reasons why I should treat the police bureau differently from the other bureaus I've administered. I believe that gaining public trust starts here at home. There are a lot of violent atrocities being perpetrated throughout the country, and it's understandable that some people are frightened. When the Irish Republican Army was terrorizing England with bombs and attacks in pubs and hotels when I was a teenager, we pulled together, we united as communities, we worked for greater trust. The biggest threat we have here in Portland is a lack of trust in our police. People in Portland are far more likely to be the target of a vehicle theft, a burglary, or an assault than a victim of terrorism. They're increasingly more likely to be a victim of hate crimes, and we need to address that in different ways. We need all of our officers on the streets of Portland helping Portlanders who have suffered crimes. Very grateful to Commissioner Hardesty for her leadership, for Commissioner Udaley for her extraordinary commitment throughout this important process, and especially today. Thank you to the ACLU, the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney for their time and diligence in giving me information. And thanks to my entire staff for engaging in this conversation, particularly Cynthia Castro, who has led the policy work, and Tim Crail, my Chief of Staff. Finally, thank you to community advocates, especially to Casey Jama, the Executive Director of Unite Oregon. On the evening of the holiday tree lighting bomb threat by Mohammed, it was Casey Jama who Mayor Adams and I turned to in order to help all of our diverse communities feel safe, welcome, and valued, as together we worked through the trauma of that event in our community, and it was traumatic for everybody. Over the years, Casey Jama has earned his position as a trusted advisor to me and to the council. So Casey, this vote is for you and for all the vulnerable communities that you represent. Aye.
Fish. Fish.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to begin by thanking the mayor and Commissioner Hardesty for structuring 2 days of high-level briefings and debate. It has been substantive and informative, but also, in my view, and unfortunately rushed. I, too, have a formal statement I want to read, but before I do, I want to say to my many friends in this room, I've read your letters and emails, I have met with many of you, and I have heard loud and clear the concerns and values that you have shared with us today. I've been proud to stand with you in opposing white nationalism, protecting our sanctuary city status, and challenging President Trump's Muslim travel ban in court. While I continue to believe that the relationship between the city and the Joint Terrorist Task Force can be strengthened, I also share many of your concerns. And now to my prepared statement. This is the third time that I voted for Portland to be part of the JTTF. Each time we've debated this question, I've concluded that Portland is safer when we have relationships with federal law enforcement. And we are in good company. Progressive cities like Oakland, New York, Seattle, and Los Angeles have made the same judgment. Now, nobody disputes that Portland faces serious threats of terrorism, both domestic and international. My confidential briefings from federal law enforcement have reinforced this sobering reality. The question is, can we balance safety and security on the one hand with protecting civil liberties on the other? I believe our experience since we rejoined the JTTF in 2015 proves that we can. The two Portland police officers assigned to the task force, known as Matt and Brian, are required to follow state law, city code, and bureau policy directives. The mayor, chief outlaw, the U.S. attorney, and our city attorney, the FBI, and the two officers have all conformed that they do. Let's take a moment to review some of the criticisms of our current relationship, and I take them seriously. First, of course, is President Trump. Now, I think we can all acknowledge that his election has certainly changed things for the worse. But when I asked the two officers during our work session yesterday if anything changed between the Portland JTTF under the Obama administration and that under the Trump administration, they both emphatically and unequivocally said no. Next, the FBI's history of civil liberties, abuses dating back to the days of J. Edgar Hoover. History is history, and that's why in any relationship, Mayor?
Folks, please let the council finish its comments and its deliberation.
History is history, and that's why in any relationship, we must trust but verify. Yesterday's work session, annual briefings, and updates to our memorandum of understanding are all opportunities to do that. Next, the FBI has not been transparent in its annual reporting. I wholeheartedly agree, and that's why I am prepared to propose an amendment to not only require more robust reports, but also to put the requirement into our memorandum of understanding with the FBI. Next, our participation violates Oregon's sanctuary law. When asked, Mayor Wheeler, Chief Outlaw, the U.S. Attorney, the FBI, and the two Portland police officers assigned to the JTTF all confirmed that in spite of differences between federal and state law, our officers are exclusively bound by state law and they follow it. Next, our participation undermines trust in the Portland police and causes concerns in marginalized communities. I acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do to strengthen the public's trust in the Portland police, and I take very seriously the concerns raised by community members who feel targeted. I also take seriously the concerns of organizations like the Jewish Federation and others who support our participation and feel targeted by acts of terrorism. Finally, our participation somehow corrupts our values. This is one of the claims that I guess I don't understand. The FBI, as has been noted, will do this work whether or not we continue participating in the JTTF. I'd rather have our values at the table than to have the FBI continue without local supervision. Why would we walk away and forfeit our opportunity for ongoing information and oversight of their work? I reject the binary choice that is being presented to council today that we must be all in or all out. I believe there's a third way, strengthening our agreement through a series of amendments I have prepared to be officially codified in the Memorandum of Understanding. Council had a work session on Tuesday, and Portlanders have just begun to engage this big question. In my view, there's no reason to rush to judgment. Many respected community voices, including Muse Olol, the Jewish Federation, the Citizens Crime Commission, anti-hate leaders like Randy Blazak, local jurisdictions like Hillsborough and Gresham, and the Oregon State Police under the leadership of Governor Kate Brown, and the major Chiefs of Police Association have expressed their support for Portland remaining in the JTTF. Their voices deserve the same consideration as those of critics. Mayor and Commissioner Hardesty, again, I want to thank you for facilitating this process to date. This has been a good debate, and I regret that we're being forced to decide this question without adequate time to engage the whole community. Few issues that come before the council are as fundamental or as important as this. We have two options before us, the path set forth in this resolution or the path of setting a national standard for this work. The choice is ours. I want to close by thanking my Chief of Staff, Sonia Schmansky, and my whole team for the work that they have done in meeting with community members and helping me reach my conclusion in this. And on the resolution, respectfully, I vote no.
Hardesty?
I want to thank my colleagues for participating over the last couple of days and what's been, for me, very revealing information. I reject the notion that this vote is somehow rushed. Since the day that we rejoined the Joint Tourism Task Force in 2015, 50 organizations have been working nonstop to make sure that Portlanders felt safe and secure in their local community. So regardless of what the Oregonians said about rushing this vote, this is not a new issue for communities. I also want to thank Jewish Voices for Peace, who has been really on the front line with us for many, many years, advocating that we have a right to feel safe in our local community. One of the things I learned by listening to Mr. Williams from the Department of Justice and Mr. Cannon from the FBI is their disregard for state law as it relates to our sanctuary status. I said and listened for over an hour of them talking about how they respect and they work with the law that Oregon has, but yet when questioned directly if they supported the sanctuary law, it became very clear that they did not. So if we have the people in charge of this task force having total disregard for our sanctuary status, how could we ever in good faith believe that two Portland police officers who are not in charge of the task force, who are not making decisions for the task force, who are merely there as part of a big law enforcement presence, would have the wherewithal to fight back against that federal intrusion on our rights? I have heard from the FBI and the Department of Justice that now they are focused on white supremacists and white nationalist groups in our community. Yet all of us have seen video pictures of police officers protecting white nationalists and attacking community members who showed up to say hate is not acceptable in our community. Here, this body just last week passed a resolution that said we stand firmly against hate and white supremacy, and we will ensure that no city resources are used to support white supremacy and white nationalist activities. I cannot have faith and confidence that we are not working in violation of the resolution that we all so proudly supported if we continue to stay in the Joint Tourism Task Force. Just recently, when the FBI was asked, the FBI took on the defense of the Ku Klux Klan at a rally that they weren't even at, implying that BAM, an organization that works for the empowerment of African American people, were in fact the terrorists, and they needed to open an investigation on them. This is a slippery slope when you cannot trust people who are sworn to protect and serve, and they are charged with protecting your civil liberties. This, by no way is this vote rushed. For a whole year, I talked about this on the campaign trail. I talked about it in every community. I talked about it at every house party that I went to. And everywhere I went, people were concerned about whether or not their data was being collected and used in a way that is against Oregon state law. We are here today because I am about keeping promises. When I said that I would bring this up at the earliest point possible, that is why we're here today. And so I reject anybody's notion that somehow this has been a rushed activity. We had standing room only at Unite Oregon last month when we had a community meeting about this very topic. We have not rushed this. This is a very thoughtful process, and this is a thoughtful process that centers all members of our community. When we talk about one Portland, a Portland where everyone is respected, we cannot, in good conscience, continue our engagement with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. I am proud to vote yes for this resolution, and I thank you again for being here.
Udaley.
So before I begin my formal remarks, I want to say that I do wish that we had an opportunity as a body to reach greater consensus among ourselves and with the police chief, as was the case in San Francisco. I believe we all want the same thing. We want to keep our community safe and protect vulnerable community members. We want our officers to abide by state and local laws and policies. We want to direct resources towards actual threats to public safety and national security. However, the testimony we heard today has gone a long way towards easing my concerns and regrets. I also want to make it clear that none of my remarks or vote today are meant to impugn the character of any of the individuals involved with Portland's JTTF. They're not on trial here today. But even good people can make bad decisions, especially within a flawed system that is biased against immigrants, ethnic and religious minorities, communities of color, and political dissenters. I do not trust this, however, I don't trust the system that JTTF functions within. I do not trust the administration who oversees it. And even if there was justification for previous involvement, we must scrutinize this agreement given the current reality. Do you feel safer today than you did 5 years ago? No. I don't. I don't either. Immigrants and refugees, African Americans, other communities of color, ethnic and religious minorities, political dissenters, LGBTQI community, basically anyone who's not part of the dominant culture, which, when you add us all up, is the majority of us. Why? Because they've seen hateful speech, actions, and crimes rise since November 2016, because members of white supremacist and other right-wing extremist groups are responsible for the vast majority of extremist-related fatalities over the past decade, yet they don't appear to be the focus of the FBI or the JTTF. And because we have seen law enforcement violate our civil rights, engage in racial profiling, persecution of immigrants, and using principled acts of civil disobedience to justify investigations. I shared this story yesterday in the work session, and I'm going to briefly share it here today just to illustrate the point. In the early 90s, I was connected to a group of activists who were found to be illegally surveilled by the Portland Police Bureau. This activity was brought to light by a lawsuit against the city, which resulted in a settlement and changes to our policy. So this is just to say that these are not wingnut conspiracies that we're hearing from left-wing activists. This really happens, and it's happened in recent history, and it continues to happen today. Today's conversation is about how we balance our responsibility to maintain public safety while protecting Portlanders' civil rights. These questions force us to examine our very definition of safety and to question whose safety we are considering. Our country's legacy of white supremacy has always skewed our perception and definition of who is dangerous and who should be subject to surveillance. We need to acknowledge that the othering of African Americans, immigrants, Muslims, other ethnic and religious minorities, the LGBTQ community, is baked into our culture, and that this othering is reinforced by law enforcement. This is not a critique of the people in law enforcement, who are often good people with good intentions, but it does point to a systemic issue. This is best evidenced by the JTTF's unwillingness to clearly identify white supremacy as the most significant domestic terrorism threat of our time. For example, I was troubled to read quotes from a recent JTTF investigation in California, Sacramento, California, in which agents wrote, quote, "The KKK consisted of members that some perceived to be supportive of a white supremacist agenda." According to the Anti-Defamation League Center on Extremism, 100% of extremist deaths in 2018 were from alt-right and white supremacist perpetrators. Unless the JTTF can unequivocally denounce white supremacy and commit to dedicating significant and targeted support to address this epidemic, it's hard for me to believe that this partnership significantly increases public safety. I've also been deeply considering how our democracy is founded on the principles of due process and how this principle continues to be denied to marginalized communities. Using immigration violations to bypass the criminal court system is a violation of the spirit of our due process protections. Additionally, I continue to be wary of supporting a partnership with any agency that works with ICE. ICE is a rogue agency whose mission appears to be the violation of basic human and constitutional rights of our immigrant communities. I'm not convinced that there are adequate protections to ensure Portland Police Bureau officers will be walled off from this component of the JTTF's activities, and without meaningful civilian oversight, I'm not confident that we could ever confirm this. Finally, I'm troubled by the FBI's historic and current surveillance of activist communities and the Portland Police Bureau's role in supporting this. In closing, I'll repeat the question I asked yesterday. How do we justify the risk of civil and human rights violations by our continued involvement in the JTTF if the justification is that this is necessary in order to promote safety? Then how can we explain the lack of investment in addressing white supremacy and continued cooperation with ICE? Sometimes we have to make decisions within a flawed system that satisfy no one. I can think of one recent example in particular. And sometimes we get to challenge and change the system. And this is one of those times. I continue to believe that we are safest when communities are connected to each other and their government. Both the perception and actual activities of the JTTF undermine this trust and therefore cannot make us safe. Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Thank you to everyone who came to testify today. This was a really excellent council session. Thank you for reassuring me and reaffirming our collective commitment to justice. This work will never be done, but today we take another step in the direction of the greater good. I vote aye.
Wheeler.
So again, to underscore a core point here, all of the Portland City Council is here today because we want to keep Portlanders safe. I start with that basic assumption that we're all here for that reason. Obviously, we may disagree about how, but we can make sure and agree that this is about making sure that all members of the community are in fact protected. Over the last 2 days, we've heard from legal experts, we've heard from local and federal jurisdictions, we've heard from advocacy organizations, we've heard from Chief Outlaw, and now we've heard from many members in our community as well. Let's be honest, this is probably one of the least surprising outcomes in terms of votes that the City Council has taken during my tenure, but I also want to make it very clear. I respect my colleagues' opinion on this matter. Nobody has a monopoly on the truth. For my own part, I've been consistent in asserting that I would support the city's withdrawal from the JTTF if given a compelling reason. After considering the weight of the testimony offered at the work session, and much of it underscored by this hearing, and in light of the information the FBI and PPB have provided in various briefings, I personally do not believe that the case to withdraw from the JTTF has been adequately made. I hope my comments are taken in the spirit of honest, yet respectful disagreement with my colleagues. While I do believe the majority of my colleagues are very well-meaning on this issue and that their values are sincere, I still believe it's a mistake for us to withdraw the City of Portland from the Joint Terrorism Task Force. To be clear, many valid questions have been asked of our federal partners regarding compliance with Oregon's sanctuary law, investigation of white supremacists, and the standards of surveillance. Valid questions have been raised around the FBI's history with respect to civil rights. The FBI and PPB have been willing to answer all of these questions. They've offered briefings to the commissioners. They voluntarily participated in yesterday's work session. I also want to say this. While I not only don't believe that the case has been made for withdrawal, but I also don't believe that the case has been made against consideration of amendments to our arrangement with the FBI. What was proposed today, I believe, is a false choice. We either are in or we are out. And I think collectively we missed an opportunity to actually lead the way for the rest of the nation in making JTTFs once and for all more accountable to the communities in which they serve. I want to be clear about a few things from a factual perspective. First of all, we are not voting on whether the JTTF should exist or not. The JTTF will continue to exist in our community whether we're part of it or not. What we're voting on is whether or not we will be engaged and whether we will be informed or whether we will be disengaged and potentially not informed. The work of the JTTF continues either way. If we withdraw, it is my opinion that we lose our ability to bring our own Portland values to the table to help establish its priorities and policies. In short, we're ceding these opportunities by walking away rather than remaining aggressively engaged.
Excuse me, Mayor, I think the captioning may have...
Is the captioning gone?
Yeah, they may have be switching out captioners, so.
Can you let me know when it's back, please? Sorry, Philip. Sorry.
Ted, well done, Ted. Very dramatic.
Maybe you'll just get up and say.
Very
I know.
dramatic.
This is the intermission. I feel like the French fries are about to dance. Sorry, folks, we want to make sure the closed captioning system's operating.
Do we run into trouble when we get past 5?
It's like 01 now.
Yeah.
She wasn't sure if they, I think they may be on now. Oh, captioners, are you there?
Is it working?
We've got a little bit.
Sort of?
They're not getting what
We
I'm
should
saying
find out
now,
if
so
Philip fixes one.
I think we're still not on yet.
I'm sorry?
I think they're having trouble, actually, because it's coming on and then it wasn't. Okay, I think they're good now.
Good?
Yeah.
All right, let's take it from where we were. So just a few more facts, and I'm going to speed this up. Number one, it was made very clear subsequent to yesterday's work session that JTT officers are not, under any circumstances, involved in immigration enforcement. I want to make that clear. It's also been made clear by the two officers who testified yesterday, and they understood very clearly they were under the Truthfulness Directive, that they have never, during their tenure as members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, violated or been asked to violate Oregon state law, nor do they find it difficult, according to their testimony, to comply with Oregon state law. This conversation to me has been about more than just policy. What I've heard repeatedly from people is that this is really about a fundamental lack of trust in the public safety system. That trust needs to be earned, absolutely. And I want you to know I fundamentally agree with that. That does not mean, however, that we should lean into hyperbole or throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. We benefit as a community by having our law enforcement partners actively communicating with each other and working together so long as there are real accountability measures in place. There are some. There's local oversight, there's congressional oversight, there's executive oversight between the Attorney General and the FBI, and of course, judicial oversight. But if we believe that the Joint Terrorism Task Force is not accountable enough, then it's our job to be stewards of this partnership and make it better over time. It is not to respond by doing away with it entirely because of what could be taking place as opposed to what is actually taking place. I was elected on a platform that included strengthening our police bureau and making it more relevant and more reflective in the needs in our community and more accountable to the public that it serves. The same holds true for the Joint Terrorism Task Force. I believe that reform comes from engagement and hard work, not from walking away and hoping that others do the work for us. Yesterday, Commissioner Fish asked if anyone on either panel disagreed that our community faces real threats, including potential school shootings, mass shootings like what happened at the Clackamas Town Center, potential acts of terrorism, or other threats. Nobody disagreed. So if working alongside our intelligence and law enforcement partners is no longer the plan, what is the plan? If we're not going to be there to evaluate intelligence of potential threats to students in our schools, what's the alternative? Out of all the expert testimony, one of the things that really stood out to me, and others referenced this, was the video from Bob Hornstein of the Jewish Federation. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said that what we've seen in the United States is a rise of white supremacist groups. They're more visible and they're more emboldened in the current environment. He's constantly thinking about security, he said, constantly thinking about upgrading the security at the Jewish Federation synagogues and other agencies. When the mass shootings happened at the synagogue in Pittsburgh in October, he immediately called his JTTF liaison here in Portland, who took the time to call Central Precinct to make sure that there were extra patrols available at the synagogues. This is just one example of the kind of security that that collaboration with the JTTF can provide locally. Last week, the Portland City Council passed a resolution condemning white supremacist and alt-right hate groups in the city of Portland. It's my opinion that now we are pulling out of a tool that could potentially help us address this increasingly dangerous issue. In fact, our JTTF officers confirmed yesterday morning that their investigative work reflects a rise in violent white supremacist activities. If this is truly a primary concern of the city of Portland, why would we interrupt a communications line to the FBI and splinter our public safety resources? Why now? We're not just talking about white supremacist and white national groups. We're also talking about lone actors. So while much attention has been given to white supremacist and white nationalist groups, and some were referenced, I believe, today, I ask this city council to also consider the danger of individual actors and the trauma that they have inflicted on communities all across this country. If we're not working with our partners to gather intelligence and investigate these issues, then what is our plan? who is working on it. But partnerships like the JTTF can give resolutions like the one we passed last week more teeth, but we have to provide the impetus. We have to be assertive and lead that effort. It's important to protect the safety and the civil rights of everyone in this community. The JTTF is another tool for being able to do so if we manage it properly. I understand that there are legitimate concerns about the history of the FBI. The value of information and our ability to shape the JTTF policies, priorities, and values, in my opinion, outweighs immediate concerns. And we should be taking all of these issues seriously for what we are confronting today and what we expect to confront in the future. We're here today with real challenges, and we need the tools to keep the people here safe. Ending this partnership, I believe, gives us fewer tools in a much more complex and much more dangerous world. A number of people gave examples of where the JTTF failed. It's true, there is no such thing as a fail-safe system. But yesterday, we also received a list of cases where the JTTF was successful working with local law enforcement on thwarting shootings, bombings, and school violence, amongst other examples. I absolutely believe that the JTTF is highly imperfect. It could do much better. I was prepared to support the amendments that were offered by Commissioner Fish. As the police commissioner, I cannot support a policy that appears to favor politics or ideology over the safety and well-being of Portlanders. While values are extremely important, values alone cannot protect the safety of the community. As police commissioner, my priority remains the safety and the well-being of the community, period. We've heard testimony that if we pull out, it will persuade the FBI to reform their system. Are we willing to risk the safety of this community on that potential outcome? The chief and I will say this. I'll speak for the chief since we're in agreement on this. I know that we have not won this vote. We will withdraw from the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and I want to make a commitment to all of you in this room, including those of you who disagree with what I just said vehemently. We're going to rise to the occasion. We will make do with the limited tools we have to ensure the safety of this community. And we will rise to the occasion in terms of ensuring accountability and transparency to the degree that we're able to do that from the sidelines of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And I hope my colleagues are serious that this council will invest in the partnership, the tools, the training, and the resources needed to address very real threats to this community. I want to thank everyone, especially my colleagues. This is an example, I think, where we had a significant disagreement of opinion. We heard all the sides. We asked a lot of questions. Personally, I'll say I have learned a lot. I appreciated the diversity of viewpoints that we heard. And on the whole, I'm very grateful for the experience we've had. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank the staffs. I want to thank Nicole Grant from my team who spent countless hours working on this. So with that, I vote no. The resolution is adopted 3-2. Carla, I will refer item 135 back to my office.
Okay.
Any colleagues, anything else? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.